theirs. Well, as I was saying, they have scarcely spoken the truth at all. But from me you shall hear the whole truth. Part 1 of Apology by Plato. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Translated by Benjamin Jowett. Read by Bob Neufeld. Apology by Plato. Part 1. How you, O Athenians, have been affected by my accusers, I cannot tell. But I know that they almost made me forget who I was, so persuasively did they speak, and yet they have hardly uttered a word of truth. But of the many falsehoods told by them, there was one which quite amazed me. I mean when they said that you should be upon your guard, and not allow yourselves to be deceived by the force of my eloquence. To say this, when they are certain to be detected as soon as I open my lips and prove myself to be anything but a great speaker, did indeed appear to me most shameless, unless by the force of eloquence they mean the force of truth. For if such is their meaning, I admit that I am eloquent. But in how different a way from theirs. Well, as I was saying, they have scarcely spoken the truth at all. But from me you shall hear the whole truth, not, however, delivered after their manner in a set oration by heaven. But I shall use the words and arguments which occur to me at the moment. For I am confident in the justice of my cause, or I am certain that I am right in taking this course. At my time of life I ought not to be appearing before you, O men of Athens, in the character of a juvenile orator. Let no one expect it of me, and I must beg of you to grant me a favor. If I defend myself in my accustomed manner, and you hear me using the words which I have been in the habit of using in the agora, at the tables of the money-changers, or anywhere else, I would ask you not to be surprised, and not to interrupt me on this account. For I am more than 70 years of age, and appearing now for the first time in a court of law, I am quite a stranger to the language of the place, and therefore I would have you regard me as if I were really a stranger, whom you would excuse if he spoke in his native tongue and after the fashion of his country. Am I making an unfair request of you? Never mind the manner, which may or may not be good, but think only of the truth of my words, and give heed to that. Let the speaker speak truly, and the judge decide justly. And first, I have to reply to the older charges and to my first accusers, and then I will go on to the latter ones. For of old I have had many accusers, who have accused me falsely to you during many years, and I am more afraid of them than of Anytus and his associates, who are dangerous too in their own way, but far more dangerous are the others, who began when you were children, and took possession of your minds with their falsehoods, telling of one Socrates, a wise man, who speculated about the heaven above, and searched into the earth beneath, and made the worse appear the better cause. The disseminators of this tale are the accusers whom I dread, for their hearers are apt to fancy that such enquirers do not believe in the existence of the gods, and they are many, and their charges against me are of ancient date, and they were made by them in the days when you were more impressible than you are now, in childhood, or it may have been in youth. And the cause, when heard, went by default, for there was none to answer. And hardest of all, I do not know and cannot tell the names of my accusers, unless in the chance case of a comic poet. All who from envy and malice have persuaded you, some of them having first convinced themselves, all this class of men are most difficult to deal with, for I cannot have them up here and cross-examine them, and therefore I must simply fight with shadows in my own defense, and argue when there is no one who answers. I will ask you then to assume with me, as I was saying, that my opponents are of two kinds, one recent, the other ancient, and I hope that you will see the propriety of my answering the latter first, for these accusations you heard long before the others, and much oftener. Well then, I must make my defense, and endeavor to clear away in a short time a slander which has lasted a long time. May I succeed, if to succeed be for my good and yours, or likely to avail me in my cause. The task is not an easy one. I quite understand the nature of it, and so, leaving the event with God, in obedience to the law, I will now make my defense. I will begin at the beginning, and ask what is the accusation which has given rise to the slander of me, and in fact has encouraged Meletus to proof this charge against me. Well, what do the slanderers say? They shall be my prosecutors, and I will sum up their words in an affidavit. Socrates is an evil-doer, and a curious person, who searches into things under the earth and in heaven, and he makes the worse appear the better cause, and he teaches the aforesaid doctrines to others. Such is the nature of the accusation. It is just what you have yourselves seen in the comedy of Aristophanes, who has introduced a man he calls Socrates, going about and saying that he walks in air, and talking a deal of nonsense concerning matters of which I do not pretend to know either much or little. Not that I mean to speak disparagingly of anyone who is a student of natural philosophy. I should be very sorry if Meletus could bring so grave a charge against me. But the simple truth is, O Athenians, that I have nothing to do with physical speculations. Very many of those here present are witnesses to the truth of this, and to them I appeal. Speak then, you who have heard me, and tell your neighbors whether any of you have ever known me hold forth in few words or in many upon such matters. You hear their answer, and from what they say of this part of the charge, you will be able to judge of the truth of the rest. As little foundation is there for the report that I am a teacher, and take money. This accusation has no more truth in it than the other. Although if a man were really able to instruct mankind, to receive money for giving instruction would, in my opinion, be an honor to him. There is Gorgias of Leontium, and Prodicus of Seos, and Hippias of Elis, who go the round of the cities, and are able to persuade the young men to leave their own citizens, by whom they might be taught for nothing, and come to them who they not only pay, but are thankful if they may be allowed to pay them. There is at this time a Parian philosopher residing in Athens, of whom I have heard, and I came to hear of him in this way. I came across a man who has spent a world of money on the sophists, Callias, the son of Hipponicus. And knowing that he had sons, I asked him, Callias, I said, if your 2 sons were foals or calves, there would be no difficulty in finding someone to put over them. We should hire a trainer of horses, or a farmer probably, who would improve and perfect them in their own proper virtue and excellence. But as they are human beings, whom are you thinking of placing over them? Is there anyone who understands human and political virtue? You must have thought about the matter, for you have sons. Is there anyone?" "There is," he said. "Who is he?" said I, "and of what country, and what does he charge?" "Evenus the Parian," he replied. "He is the man, and his charge is 5 minae. Happy is Evenus, I said to myself, if he really has this wisdom and teaches at such a moderate charge. Had I the same, I should have been very proud and conceited. But the truth is that I have no knowledge of the kind. I dare say, Athenians, that some one among you will reply, 'Yes, Socrates, but what is the origin of these accusations which are brought against you? There must have been something strange which you have been doing. All these rumors and this talk about you would never have arisen if you had been like other men. Tell us, then, what is the cause of them, for we should be sorry to judge hastily of you.' Now, I regard this as a fair challenge, and I will endeavor to explain to you the reason why I am called wise and have such an evil fame. Please to attend them, and although some of you may think that I am joking, I declare that I will tell you the entire truth. Men of Athens, this reputation of mine has come from a certain sort of wisdom which I possess. If you ask me what kind of wisdom, I reply, wisdom such as may perhaps be attained by man. For to that extent I am inclined to believe that I am wise, whereas the persons of whom I was speaking have a superhuman wisdom which I may fail to describe, because I have it not myself. And he who says that I have speaks falsely, and is taking away my character. And here, O men of Athens, I must beg you not to interrupt me, even if I seem to say something extravagant. For the word which I will speak is not mine. I will refer you to a witness who is worthy of credit. That witness shall be the god of Delphi. He will tell you about my wisdom, if I have any, and of what sort it is. You must have known Chaerephon. He was early a friend of mine, and also a friend of yours, for he shared in the recent exile of the people, and returned with you. Well, Chaerephon, as you know, was very impetuous in all his doing, and he went to Delphi and boldly asked the oracle to tell him whether, as I was saying, I must beg you not to interrupt. He asked the oracle to tell him whether anyone was wiser than I was, and the Pythian prophetess answered that there was no man wiser. Chaerephon is dead himself, but his brother, who is in court, will confirm the truth of what I am saying. Why do I mention this? Because I am going to explain to you why I have such an evil name. When I heard the answer, I said to myself, what can the god mean? And what is the interpretation of his riddle? For I know that I have no wisdom, small or great. What then can he mean when he says that I am the wisest of men? And yet he is a god, cannot lie. That would be against his nature. After long consideration, I thought of a method of trying the question. I reflected that if I could only find a man wiser than myself, then I might go to the god with a refutation in my hand. I should say to him, here is a man who is wiser than I am, but you said that I was the wisest. Accordingly, I went to one who had the reputation of wisdom, and observed him. His name I need not mention. He was a politician whom I selected for examination, and the result was as follows. When I began to talk with him, I could not help thinking that he was not really wise, although he was thought wise by many, and still wiser by himself. and thereupon I tried to explain to him that he thought himself wise, but was not really wise, and the consequence was that he hated me, and his enmity was shared by several who were present and heard me. So I left him, saying to myself as I went away, "Well, although I do not suppose that either of us knows anything really beautiful and good, I am better off than he is, for he knows nothing, and thinks that he knows. I neither know nor think that I know. In the latter particular, then, I seem to have slightly the advantage of him." Then I went to another who had still higher pretensions to wisdom, and my conclusion was exactly the same. Whereupon I made another enemy of him, and of many others beside him. Then I went to one man after another, being not unconscious of the enmity which I provoked, and I lamented and feared this. But necessity was laid upon me. The word of God, I thought, ought to be considered first, and I said to myself, "Go I must to all who appeared to know, and find out the meaning of the oracle. And I swear to you, Athenians, by the dog I swear, for I must tell you the truth, the result of my mission was just this. I found that the men most in repute were all but the most foolish, and that others less esteemed were really wiser and better. I will tell you the tale of my wanderings, and of the Herculean labors, as I may call them, which I endured only to find at last the oracle irrefutable. After the politicians, I went to the poets, tragic, dithyrambic, and all sorts, and there I said to myself, "You will be instantly detected. Now you will find out that you are more ignorant than they are." Accordingly, I took them some of the most elaborate passages in their own writings, and asked what was the meaning of them, thinking that they would teach me something. Will you believe me? I am almost ashamed to confess the truth, but I must say that there is hardly a person present who would not have talked better about their poetry than they did themselves. Then I knew that not by wisdom do poets write poetry, but by a sort of genius and inspiration. They are like diviners and soothsayers, who also say many fine things, but do not understand the meaning of them. The poets appeared to me to be much in the same case, and I further observed that upon the strength of their poetry they believed themselves to be the wisest of men in other things in which they were not wise. So I departed, conceiving myself to be superior to them for the same reason that I was superior to the politicians. At last I went to the artisans. I was conscious that I knew nothing at all, as I may say, and I was sure that they knew many fine things. And here I was not mistaken, for they did know many things of which I was ignorant, and in this they certainly were wiser than I was. But I observed that even the good artisans fell into the same error as the poets. Because they were good workmen, they thought that they also knew all sorts of high matters, and this defect in them overshadowed their wisdom. And therefore I asked myself on behalf of the oracle whether I would like to be as I was, neither having their knowledge nor their ignorance, or like them in both. And I made answer to myself and to the oracle that I was better off as I was. This inquisition has led to my having many enemies of the worst and most dangerous kind, and has given occasion also to many calumnies. And I am called wise, for my hearers always imagine that I myself possess the wisdom which I find wanting in others. But the truth is, O men of Athens, that God only is wise, and by his answer he intends to show that the wisdom of men is worth little or nothing. He is not speaking of Socrates. He is only using my name by way of illustration, as if he said, He, O men, is the wisest who, like Socrates, knows that his wisdom is in truth worth nothing. And so I go about the world, obedient to the god, and search and make inquiry into the wisdom of anyone, whether citizen or stranger, who appears to be wise. And if he is not wise, then in vindication of the oracle I show him that he is not wise. And my occupation quite absorbs me, and I have no time to give, either to any public matter of interest or to any concern of my own, but I am in utter poverty by reason of my devotion to the god. There is another thing. Young men of the richer classes, who have not much to do, come about me of their own accord. They like to hear the pretenders examined, and they often imitate me and proceed to examine others. There are plenty of persons, as they quickly discover, who think that they know something, but really know little or nothing, and then those who are examined by them, instead of being angry with themselves, are angry with me. This confounded Socrates, they say, this villainous misleader of youth. And then, if somebody asks them, why, what evil does he practice or teach? They do not know, and cannot tell. But in order that they may not appear to be at a loss, they repeat the ready-made charges which are used against all philosophers, about teaching things up in the clouds and under the earth, and having no gods, and making the worse appear the better cause. For they do not like to confess that their pretence of knowledge has been detected, which is the truth, and as they are numerous, and ambitious, and energetic, and are drawn up in battle array, and have persuasive tongues, they have filled your ears with their loud and inveterate calumnies. And this is the reason why my 3 accusers, Meletus, and Anytus, and Lycon, have set upon me. Meletus, who has a quarrel with me on behalf of the poets, Anytus on behalf of the craftsmen and politicians, Lycon on behalf of the rhetoricians. And as I said at the beginning, I cannot expect to get rid of such a mass of calumny all in a moment. And this, O men of Athens, is the truth, and the whole truth. I have concealed nothing, I have dissembled nothing, and yet I know that my plainness of speech makes them hate me. And what is their hatred but a proof that I am speaking the truth? Hence has arisen the prejudice against me, and this is the reason for it, as you will find out either in this or in any future inquiry. I have said enough in my defense against the first class of my accusers. I turn to the second class. They are headed by Meletus, that good man and true lover of his country, as he calls himself. Against these two I must try to make a defense. Let their affidavit be read. It contains something of this kind. It says that Socrates is a doer of evil, who corrupts the youth, and who does not believe in the gods of the state, but has other new divinities of his own. Such is the charge. And now let us examine the particular counts. He says that I am a doer of evil, and corrupt the youth. But I say, O men of Athens, that Meletus is a doer of evil, in that he pretends to be in earnest when he is only in jest, and is so eager to bring men to trial from a pretended zeal, and interest about matters in which he really never had the smallest interest. And the truth of this I will endeavor to prove to you. Come hither, Meletus, and let me ask a question of you. You think a great deal about the improvement of youth? Yes, I do. Well, tell the judges, then, who is their improver. For you must know, as you have taken the pains to discover the corrupter, and are citing and accusing me before them. Speak, then, and tell the judges who their improver is. Observe, Meletus, that you are silent, and have nothing to say. But is not this rather disgraceful, and a very considerable proof of what I was saying, that you have no interest in the matter? Speak up, friend, and tell us who their improver is. The laws. But that, my good sir, is not my meaning. I want to know who the person is who, in the first place, knows the laws. The judges, Socrates, who are present in court. What do you mean to say, Meletus, that they are able to instruct and improve youth? Certainly they are. What, all of them, or some only, and not others? All of them. By the goddess Hera, that is good news. There are plenty of improvers, then. And what do you say of the audience? Do they improve them? Yes, they do. And the senators? Yes, the senators improve them. But perhaps the members of the assembly corrupt them, or do they too improve them? They improve them. Then every Athenian improves and elevates them, all with the exception of myself, and I alone am their corrupter. Is that what you affirm? That is what I stoutly affirm. I am very unfortunate if you are right. But suppose I ask you a question. How about horses? Does one man do them harm and all the world good? Is not the exact opposite the truth? One man is able to do them good, or at least not many. The trainer of horses, that is to say, does them good, and others who have to do with them rather injure them. Is that not true, Meletus, of horses, or of any other animals? Most assuredly it is, whether you and Anytus say yes or no. Happy indeed would be the condition of youth if they had one corrupter only, then all the rest of the world were their improvers. But you, Meletus, have sufficiently shown that you never had a thought about the young. Your carelessness is seen in your not caring about the very things which you bring against me. And now, Meletus, I will ask you another question. By Zeus I will. Which is better, to live among bad citizens or among good ones? Answer, friend, I say. The question is one which may be easily answered. Do not the good do their neighbors good, and the bad do them evil? Oh, certainly. And is there anyone who would rather be injured than benefited by those who live with them? Answer, my good friend. The law requires you to answer. Does anyone like to be injured? Certainly not. And when you accuse me of corrupting and deteriorating the youth, do you allege that I corrupt them intentionally or unintentionally? Intentionally, I say. But you have just admitted that the good do their neighbors good and the evil do them evil. Now, is that a truth which your superior wisdom has recognized thus early in life? And am I, at my age, in such darkness and ignorance as not to know that if a man with whom I have to live is corrupted by me, I am very likely to be harmed by him? And yet I corrupt him, and intentionally too, you say, although neither I nor any other human being is ever likely to be convinced by you. But either I do not corrupt them, or I corrupt them unintentionally, and on either view of the case you lie. If my offense is unintentional, the law has no cognizance of unintentional offenses. You ought to have taken me privately, and warned and admonished me. For if I had been better advised, I should have left off doing what I only did unintentionally. No doubt I should, but you would have nothing to say to me, and refused to teach me. And now you bring me up in this court, which is a place not of instruction, but of punishment. It will be very clear to you, Athenians, as I was saying, that Meletus has no care at all, great or small, about the matter. But still I should like to know, Meletus, in what I am affirmed to corrupt the young. I suppose you mean, as I infer from your indictment, that I teach them not to acknowledge the gods which the state acknowledges, but some other new divinities or spiritual agencies in their stead. These are the lessons by which I corrupt the youth, as you say. Yes, that I say emphatically. Then by the gods, Meletus, of whom we are speaking, tell me and the court, in somewhat plainer terms, what you mean. For I do not as yet understand whether you affirm that I teach other men to acknowledge some gods, and therefore that I do believe in gods, or am not an entire atheist. This you do not lay to my charge, but only you say that they are not the same gods which the city recognizes. The charge is that they are different gods. Or do you mean that I am an atheist simply, and a teacher of atheism? I mean the latter, that you are a complete atheist. What an extraordinary statement! Why do you think so, Meletus? Do you mean that I do not believe in the godhead of the sun or moon like other men? I assure you, judges, that he does not, for he says that the sun is stone and the moon earth. Friend Meletus, you think that you are accusing Anaxagoras, and you have but a bad opinion of the judges, if you fancy them illiterate to such a degree as not to know that these doctrines are found in the books of Anaxagoras, the Clazomanian, which are full of them. And so, forsooth, the youth are said to be taught them by Socrates, when there are not unfrequently exhibitions of them at the theatre. And they might pay their money and laugh at Socrates if he pretends to father these extraordinary views. And so, Meletus, you really think that I do not believe in any god? I swear by Zeus that you believe absolutely in none at all. Nobody will believe you, Meletus, and I am pretty sure that you do not believe yourself. I cannot help thinking, men of Athens, that Meletus is reckless and impudent, and that he has written this indictment in a spirit of mere wantonness and youthful bravado. Has he not compounded a riddle, thinking to try me? He said to himself, I shall see whether the wise Socrates will discover my facetious contradiction, or whether I shall be able to deceive him and the rest of them. For he certainly does appear to me to contradict himself in the indictment, as much as if he said that Socrates is guilty of not believing in the gods, and yet of believing in them. But this is not like the person who is in earnest. I should like you, O men of Athens, to join me in examining what I conceive to be his inconsistency. And do you, Meletus, answer. And I must remind the audience of my request that they would not make a disturbance if I speak in my accustomed manner. Did ever man, Meletus, believe in the existence of human beings and not of human things? I wish, men of Athens, that he would answer, and not be always trying to get up an interruption. Did ever any man believe in horsemanship and not in horses, in flute playing and not in flute players? No, my friend, I will answer to you and to the court, as you refuse to answer for yourself. There is no man who ever did. But now please to answer the next question. Can a man believe in spiritual and divine agencies, and not in spirits or demigods? He cannot. How lucky I am to have extracted that answer by the assistance of the court. But then you swear in the indictment that I teach and believe in divine or spiritual agencies, new or old, no matter for that. At any rate, I believe in spiritual agencies, so you say, and swear in the affidavit. And yet, if I believe in divine beings, how can I help believing in spirits or demigods? Must I not? To be sure I must, and therefore I may assume that your silence gives consent. Now, what are spirits or demigods? Are they not either gods or the sons of gods? Certainly they are. But this is what I call the facetious riddle invented by you. The demigods or spirits are gods, and you say first that I do not believe in gods, and then again that I do believe in gods. That is, if I believe in demigods. For if the demigods are the illegitimate sons of gods, whether by the nymphs or by any other mothers, of whom they are said to be the sons, what human being will ever believe that there are no gods if they are the sons of gods? You might as well affirm the existence of mules and deny that of horses and asses. Such nonsense, Meletus, could only have been intended by you to make trial of me. You have put this into the indictment because you had nothing real of which to accuse me. But no one who has a particle of understanding will ever be convinced by you that the same men can believe in divine and superhuman beings, and yet not believe that there are gods and demigods and heroes. I have said enough in answer to the charge of Meletus. Any elaborate defense is unnecessary. But I know only too well how many are the enmities which I have incurred, and this is what will be my destruction if I am destroyed. Not Meletus, not yet Anytus, but the envy and distraction of the world, which has been the death of many good men, and will probably be the death of many more. There is no danger of my being the last of them. Someone will say, "And are you not ashamed, Socrates, of a course of life which is likely to bring you to an untimely end?" To him I may fairly answer, "There you are mistaken. A man who is good for anything ought not to calculate the chance of living or dying. He ought only to consider whether in doing anything he is doing right or wrong, acting the part of a good man or of a bad. Whereas, upon your view, the heroes who fell at Troy were not good for much, and the son of Thetis, above all, who altogether despised danger in comparison with disgrace. And when he was eager to slay Hector, his goddess mother said to him that if he avenged his companion Patroclus and slew Hector, he would die himself. Fate, she said, in these or the like words, waits for you next after Hector. He received this warning, utterly despised danger and death, and instead of fearing them, feared rather to live in dishonor, and not to avenge his friend. "Let me die forthwith," he replies, "and be avenged of my enemy, rather than abide here by the beaked ships, a laughing-stock and a burden of the earth." Had Achilles any thought of death and danger? For wherever a man's place is, whether the place which he has chosen or that in which he has been placed by a commander, there he ought to remain in the hour of danger. He should not think of death or of anything but of disgrace. And this, O men of Athens, is a true saying. Strange indeed would be my conduct, O men of Athens, if I, who when I was ordered by the generals whom you chose to command me at Potidaea, and Amphipolis and Delium, remained where they placed me, like any other man, facing death, if now, when, as I conceive and imagine, God orders me to fulfill the philosopher's mission of searching into himself and other men, I were to desert my post through fear of death or any other fear. That would indeed be strange, and I might be justly arraigned in court for denying the existence of the gods if I disobeyed the oracle because I was afraid of death, fancying that I was wise when I was not wise. For the fear of death is indeed the pretense of wisdom, and not real wisdom, being a pretense of knowing the unknown. And no one knows whether death, which men in their fear apprehend to be the greatest evil, may not be the greatest good. Is not this ignorance of a disgraceful sort, the ignorance which is the conceit that a man knows what he does not know? And in this respect only I believe myself to differ from men in general, and may perhaps claim to be wiser than they are. Whereas I know but little of the world below, I do not suppose that I know, but I do know that injustice and disobedience to a better, whether God or man, is evil and dishonorable, and I will never fear or avoid a possible good rather than a certain evil. And therefore, if you let me go now, and are not convinced by Anytus, who said that since I have been persecuted, I must be put to death, or if not, that I ought never to have been prosecuted at all, and that if I escape now, your sons will all be utterly ruined by listening to my words, if you say to me, Socrates, this time we will not mind Anytus, and you shall be let off, but upon one condition, that you are not to inquire and speculate in this way any more, and that if you are caught doing so again, you shall die. If this was the condition on which you let me go, I should reply, Men of Athens, I honor and love you, but I shall obey God rather than you. And while I have life and strength, I shall never cease from the practice and teaching of philosophy, exhorting anyone whom I meet, and saying to him after my manner, You, my friend, a citizen of the great and mighty and wise city of Athens, are you not ashamed of heaping up the greatest amount of money and honor and reputation, and caring so little about wisdom and truth and the greatest improvement of the soul, which you never regard or heed at all? And if the person with whom I am arguing says, Yes, but I do care, then I do not leave him or let him go at once, but I proceed to interrogate and examine and cross-examine him. And if I think that he has no virtue in him, but only says that he has, I reproach him with undervaluing the greater and overvaluing the less. And I shall repeat the same words to everyone whom I meet, young and old, citizen and alien, but especially to the citizens, inasmuch as they are my brethren. For know that this is the command of God, and I believe that no greater good has ever happened in the state than my service to the God. For I do nothing but go about persuading you all, old and young alike, not to take thought for your persons or your properties, but first and chiefly to care about the greatest improvement of the soul. I tell you that virtue is not given by money, but that from virtue comes money and every other good of man, public as well as private. This is my teaching, and if this is the doctrine which corrupts the youth, I am a mischievous person. But if anyone says that this is not my teaching, he is speaking an untruth. Wherefore, O men of Athens, I say to you, do as Anytus bids or not as Anytus bids, and either acquit me or not. But whichever you do, understand that I shall never alter my ways, not even if I have to die many times. End of Part 1. Apology by Plato. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bob Neufeld. Apology by Plato, Part 2. Men of Athens, do not interrupt, but hear me. There was an understanding between us that you should hear me to the end. I have something more to say, at which you may be inclined to cry out. But I believe that to hear me will be good for you, and therefore I beg that you will not cry out. I would have you know that if you kill such a one as I am, you will injure yourselves more than you will injure me. Nothing will injure me, not Meletus nor yet Anytus. They cannot, for a bad man is not permitted to injure a better than himself. I do not deny that Anytus may, perhaps, kill him, or drive him into exile, or deprive him of civil rights. And he may imagine, and others may imagine, that he is inflicting a great injury upon him. But there I do not agree. For the evil of doing as he is doing, the evil of unjustly taking away the life of another, is greater far. And now, Athenians, I am not going to argue for my own sake, as you may think, but for yours, that you may not sin against the God by condemning me, who am his gift to you. For if you kill me, you will not easily find a successor to me, who, if I may use such a ludicrous figure of speech, am a sort of gadfly, given to the state by God, and the state is a great and noble steed, who is tardy in his motions owing to his very size, and requires to be stirred into life. I am that gadfly which God has attached to the state, and all day long and in all places am always fastening upon you, arousing and persuading and reproaching you. You will not easily find another like me, and therefore I would advise you to spare me. I dare say that you may feel out of temper, like a person who is suddenly awakened from sleep, and you think that you might easily strike me dead as Anytus advises, and then you would sleep on for the remainder of your lives, unless God in his care of you sent you another gadfly. When I say that I am given to you by God, the proof of my mission is this. If I had been like other men, I should not have neglected all my own concerns, or patiently seen the neglect of them during all these years, and have been doing yours, coming to you individually like a father or elder brother, exhorting you to regard virtue. Such conduct, I say, would be unlike human nature. If I gained nothing, or if my exhortations had been paid, there would have been some sense in my doing so. But now, as you will perceive, not even the impudence of my accusers dares to say that I have ever exacted or sought pay of anyone. Of that they have no witness, and I have a sufficient witness to the truth of what I say, my poverty. Someone may wonder why I go about in private giving advice and busying myself with the concerns of others, but do not venture to come forward in public and advise the state. I will tell you why. You have heard me speak at sundry times and in divers places of an oracle or sign which comes to me, and is the divinity which Meletus ridicules in the indictment. This sign, which is a kind of voice, first began to come to me when I was a child. It always forbids but never commands me to do anything which I am going to do. This is what deters me from being a politician. And rightly, as I think, for I am certain, O men of Athens, that if I had engaged in politics, I should have perished long ago, and done no good either to you or to myself. And do not be offended at my telling you the truth, for the truth is that no man who goes to war with you or any other multitude, honestly striving against the many lawless and unrighteous deeds which are done in a state, will save his life. He who will fight for the right, if he would live even for a brief space, must have a private station, and not a public one. I can give you convincing evidence of what I say, not words only, but what you value far more, actions. Let me relate to you a passage of my own life which will prove to you that I should never have yielded to injustice from any fear of death, and that, as I should have refused to yield, I must have died at once. I will tell you a tale of the courts, not very interesting perhaps, but nevertheless true. The only office of state which I ever held, O men of Athens, was that of senator. The tribe Antiochus, which is my tribe, had the presidency at the trial of the generals who had not taken up the bodies of the slain after the battle of Arginusae. And you proposed to try them in a body, contrary to law, as you all thought afterwards. But at the time I was the only one of the Prytanes who was opposed to the illegality, and I gave my vote against you. And when the orators threatened to impeach and arrest me, and you called and shouted, I made up my mind that I would run the risk, having law and justice with me, rather than take part in the injustice, because I feared imprisonment and death. This happened in the days of the democracy. But when the oligarchy of the 30 was in power, they sent for me and 4 others into the rotunda, and bade us bring Leon the Salaminian from Salamis, as they wanted to put him to death. This was a specimen of the sort of commands which they were always giving with the view of implicating as many as possible in their crimes. And then I showed, not in word only, but in deed, that, if I may be allowed to use such an expression, I cared not a straw for death, and that my great and only care was lest I should do an unrighteous or unholy thing. For the strong arm of that oppressive power did not frighten me into doing wrong. And when we came out of the rotunda, the other 4 went to Salamis and fetched Leon, but I went quietly home. For which I might have lost my life, had not the power of the 30 shortly afterwards come to an end. And many will witness to my words. Now, do you really imagine that I could have survived all these years if I had led a public life, supposing that, like a good man, I had always maintained the right and had made justice as I ought the first thing? No, indeed, men of Athens, neither I nor any other man. But I have been always the same in all my actions, public as well as private, and never have I yielded any base compliance to those who are slanderously termed my disciples, or to any other. Not that I have any regular disciples, but if anyone likes to come and hear me while I am pursuing my mission, whether he be young or old, he is not excluded. Nor do I converse only with those who pay, but anyone, whether he be rich or poor, may ask and answer me and listen to my words. And whether he turns out to be a bad man or a good one, neither result can be justly imputed to me. For I have never taught or professed to teach him anything. And if anyone says that he has ever learned or heard anything from me in private, which all the world has not heard, let me tell you that he is lying. But I shall be asked, why do people delight in continually conversing with you? I have told you already, Athenians, the whole truth about this matter. They like to hear the cross-examination of the pretenders to wisdom. There is amusement in it. Now, this duty of cross-examining other men has been imposed upon me by God, and has been signified to me by oracles, visions, and in every way in which the will of divine power has ever intimated to anyone. This is true, O Athenians, or, if not true, would be soon refuted. If I am or have been corrupting the youth, those of them that are now grown up and have become sensible that I gave them bad advice in the days of their youth should come forward as accusers and take their revenge. Or if they do not like to come themselves, some of their relatives, fathers, brothers, or other kinsmen, should say what evil their families have suffered at my hands. Now is their time. Many of them I see in the court. There is Crito, who is of the same age and of the same demi with myself, and there is Critobulus, his son, whom I also see. Then again there is Lysanias of Sphatus, who is the father of Ascanicia. He is present. And also there is Antiphon of Sisyphus, who is the father of Epigenes. And there are the brothers of several who have associated with me. There is Nicostratus, the son of Theosdotides, and the brother of Theodotus. Now, Theodotus himself is dead, and therefore he, at any rate, will not seek to stop him. And there is Paralus, the son of Demodocus, who had a brother, Pheges. And Adimantus, the son of Ariston, whose brother Plato is present. And Aeantodorus, who is the brother of Apollodorus, whom I also see. I might mention a great many others, some of whom Meletus should have produced as witnesses in the course of his speech, and let him still produce them. If he has forgotten, I will make way for him. And let him say if he has any testimony of the sort which he can produce. Nay, Athenians, the very opposite is the truth. For all these are ready to witness on behalf of the corrupter, of the injurer of their kindred, as Meletus and Anytus call me. Not the corrupted youth only, there might have been a motive for that, but their uncorrupted elder relatives. Why should they, too, support me with their testimony? Why, indeed, except for the sake of truth and justice, and because they know that I am speaking the truth, and that Meletus is a liar. Well, Athenians, this and the like of this is all the defense which I have to offer. Yet a word more. Perhaps there may be someone who is offended at me when he calls to mind how he himself, on a similar, or even a less serious occasion, prayed and entreated the justice with many tears, and how he produced his children in court, which was a moving spectacle, together with a host of relations and friends. Whereas I, who am probably in danger of my life, will do none of these things. The contrast may occur to his mind, and he may be set against me, and vote in anger, because he is displeased at me on this account. Now, if there be such a person among you, mind, I do not say that there is, to him I may fairly reply, My friend, I am a man, and like other men, a creature of flesh and blood, and not of wood or stone, as Homer says. And I have a family, yes, and sons, O Athenians, 3 in number. 1 almost a man, and 2 others who are still young. And yet I will not bring any of them hither in order to petition you for an acquittal. And why not? Not from any self-assertion or want of respect for you. Whether I am or am not afraid of death is another question of which I will not now speak. But, having regard to public opinion, I feel that such conduct would be discreditable to myself, and to you, and to the whole state. One who has reached my years, and who has a name for wisdom, ought not to demean himself. Whether this opinion of me be deserved or not, at any rate, the world has decided that Socrates is in some way superior to other men. And if those among you who are said to be superior in wisdom and courage, and any other virtue, demean themselves in this way, how shameful is their conduct. I have seen men of reputation, when they have been condemned, behaving in the strangest manner. They seemed to fancy that they were going to suffer something dreadful if they died, and that they could be immortal if you only allowed them to live. And I think that such are a dishonor to the state, and that any stranger coming in would have said of them that the most eminent men of Athens, to whom the Athenians sometimes give honor and command, are no better than women. And I say that these things ought not to be done by those of us who have a reputation, and if they are done, you ought not to permit them. You ought, rather, to show that you are far more disposed to condemn the man who gets up a doleful scene and makes the city ridiculous, than him who holds his peace. But setting aside the question of public opinion, there seems to be something wrong in asking a favor of a judge, and thus procuring an acquittal, instead of informing and convincing him. For his duty is not to make a present of justice, but to give judgment, and he has sworn that he will judge according to the laws, and not according to his own good pleasure. And we ought not to encourage you, nor should you allow yourselves to be encouraged in this habit of perjury. There can be no piety in that. Do not then require me to do what I consider dishonorable and impious and wrong, especially now, when I am being tried for impiety on the indictment of Miletus. For if, O men of Athens, by force of persuasion and entreaty I could overpower your oaths, then I should be teaching you to believe that there are no gods, and in defending should simply convict myself of the charge of not believing in them. But that is not, so far, otherwise. For I do believe that there are gods, and in a sense higher than that in which any of my accusers believe in them. And to you and to God I commit my cause, to be determined by you as is best for you and me. And there are many reasons why I am not grieved, O men of Athens, at the vote of condemnation. I expected it, and am only surprised that the votes were so nearly equal. For I had thought that the majority against me would have been far larger. But now, had 30 votes gone over to the other side, I should have been acquitted. And I may say, I think, that I have escaped Miletus. I may say more, for without the assistance of Anytus and Lycon, anyone may see that he would not have had a fifth part of the votes, as the law requires, in which case he would have incurred a fine of 1,000 drachmae. And so he proposes death as the penalty. And what shall I propose on my part, O men of Athens? Clearly that which is my due. And what is my due? What return shall be made to the man who has never had the wit to be idle during his whole life, but has been careless of what the many care for, wealth and family interests and military offices, and speaking in the assembly, and magistracies and plots and parties? Reflecting that I was really too honest a man to be a politician and live, I did not go where I could do no good to you or to myself, but where I could do the greatest good privately to every one of you. Thither I went, and sought to persuade every man among you that he must look to himself, and seek virtue and wisdom before he looks to his private interests, and look to the state before he looks to the interests of the state, and that this should be the order which he observes in all his actions. What shall be done to such an one? Doubtless some good thing, O men of Athens, if he has his reward, and the good should be of a kind suitable to him. What would be a reward suitable to a poor man who is your benefactor, and who desires leisure that he may instruct you? There can be no reward so fitting as maintenance in the Prytaneum, O men of Athens, a reward which he deserves far more than the citizen who has won the prize at Olympia in the horse or chariot race, whether the chariots were drawn by 2 horses or by many. For I am in want, and he has enough, and he only gives you the appearance of happiness, and I give you the reality. And if I am to estimate the penalty fairly, I should say that maintenance in the Prytaneum is the just return. Perhaps you think that I am braving you in what I am saying now, as in what I said before about the tears and prayers. But this is not so. I speak rather because I am convinced that I never intentionally wronged anyone. Although I cannot convince you, the time has been too short. If there were a law at Athens, as there is in other cities, that a capital cause should not be decided in one day, then I believe that I should have convinced you. But I cannot in a moment refute great slanders, and as I am convinced that I never wronged another, I will assuredly not wrong myself. I will not say of myself that I deserve any evil or propose any penalty. Why should I? Because I am afraid of the penalty of death which Meletus proposes? When I do not know whether death is a good or an evil, why should I propose a penalty which would certainly be an evil? Shall I say imprisonment? And why should I live in prison and be the slave of the magistrates of the year, of the 11? Or shall the penalty be a fine, and imprisonment until the fine is paid? There is the same objection. I should have to lie in prison, for money I have none and cannot pay. And if I say exile, and this may possibly be the penalty which you will affix, I must indeed be blinded by the love of life, if I am so irrational as to expect that when you, who are my citizens, cannot endure my discourses and words, and have found them so grievous and odious that you will have no more of them, others are likely to endure me. No, indeed, men of Athens, that is not very likely. And what a life I should lead at my age, wandering from city to city, ever changing my place of exile, and always being driven out. For I am quite sure that wherever I go, there as here the young men will flock to me, and if I drive them away, their elders will drive me out at their request, and if I let them come, their fathers and friends will drive me out for their sakes. Someone will say, "Yes, Socrates, but cannot you hold your tongue, and then you may go into a foreign city, and no one will interfere with you?" Now, I have great difficulty in making you understand my answer to this. For if I tell you that to do as you say would be a disobedience to the god, therefore that I cannot hold my tongue, you will not believe that I am serious. And if I say again that daily to discourse about virtue, and of these other things about which you hear me examining myself and others, is the greatest good of man, and that the unexamined life is not worth living, you are still less likely to believe me. Yet I say what is true, although a thing of which it is hard for me to persuade you. Also, I have never been accustomed to think that I deserve to suffer any harm. Had I money, I might have estimated the offense at what I was able to pay, and not have been much the worse. But I have none, and therefore I must ask you to proportion the fine to my means. Well, perhaps I could afford a mina, and therefore I propose that penalty. Plato, Crito, Critobulus, and Apollodorus, my friends here, bid me say 30 minae, and they will be the sureties. Let 30 minae be the penalty, for which sum they will be ample security to you. Not much time will be gained, O Athenians, in return for the evil name which you will get from the detractors of the city, who will say that you killed Socrates, a wise man. For they will call me wise, even though I am not wise, when they want to reproach you. If you had waited a little while, your desire would have been fulfilled in the course of nature. For I am far advanced in years, as you may perceive, and not far from death. I am speaking now not to all of you, but only to those who have condemned me to death. And I have another thing to say to them. You think that I was convicted because I had no words of the sort which would have procured my acquittal. All mean if I had thought fit to leave nothing undone or unsaid. Not so. The deficiency which led to my conviction was not of words, certainly not. But I had not the boldness or impudence or inclination to address you as you would have liked me to do, weeping and wailing and lamenting and saying and doing many things which you have been accustomed to hear from others, and which, as I maintain, are unworthy of me. I thought at the time that I ought not to do anything common or mean when in danger, nor do I now repent of the style of my defence. I would rather die, having spoken after my manner, than speak to you in your manner and live. For neither in war nor yet at law ought I or any man to use every way of escaping death. Often in battle there can be no doubt that if a man will throw away his arms and fall on his knees before his pursuers, he may escape death. And in other dangers there are other ways of escaping death, if a man is willing to say and do anything. The difficulty, my friends, is not to avoid death, but to avoid unrighteousness, for that runs faster than death. I am old and move slowly, and the slower runner has overtaken me, and my accusers are keen and quick, and the faster runner, who is unrighteousness, has overtaken them. And now I depart hence condemned by you to suffer the penalty of death. They too go their ways, condemned by the truth to suffer the penalty of villainy and wrong. And I must abide by my award, let them abide by theirs. I suppose that these things may be regarded as fated, and I think that they are well. And now, O men who have condemned me, I would fain prophesy to you. For I am about to die, and in the hour of death men are gifted with prophetic power. And I prophesy to you who are my murderers, that immediately after my departure, punishment far heavier than you have inflicted on me will surely await you. Me you have killed because you wanted to escape the accuser, and not to give an account of your lives. But that will not be as you suppose. Far otherwise. For I say that there will be more accusers of you than there are now, accusers whom hitherto I have restrained, and as they are younger, they will be more inconsiderate with you, and you will be more offended at them. If you think that by killing men you can prevent someone from censuring your evil lives, you are mistaken. That is not a way of escape which is either possible or honorable. The easiest and the noblest way is not to be disabling others, but to be improving yourselves. This is the prophecy which I utter before my departure to the judges who have condemned me. Friends who would have acquitted me, I would like also to talk with you about the thing which has come to pass, while the magistrates are busy, and before I go to the place at which I must die. Stay then a little, for we may as well talk with one another while there is time. You are my friends, and I should like to show you the meaning of this event which has happened to me. Oh, my judges, for you I may truly call judges, I should like to tell you of a wonderful circumstance. Hitherto, the divine faculty of which the internal oracle is the source has constantly been in the habit of opposing me, even about trifles, if I was going to make a slip or error in any matter. And now, as you see, there has come upon me that which may be thought, and is generally believed to be, the last and worst evil. But the oracle made no sign of opposition, either when I was leaving my house in the morning, or when I was on my way to the court, or while I was speaking, at anything which I was going to say. And yet I have often been stopped in the middle of a speech, but now in nothing I either said or did touching the matter in hand has the oracle opposed me. What do I take to be the explanation of this silence? I will tell you. It is an intimation that what has happened to me is a good, and that those of us who think that death is an evil are in error. For the customary sign would surely have opposed me had I been going to evil and not to good. Let us reflect in another way, and we shall see that there is great reason to hope that death is a good. For one of two things: either death is a state of nothingness and utter unconsciousness, or, as men say, there is a change and migration of the soul from this world to another. Now, if you suppose that there is no consciousness, but a sleep like the sleep of him who is undisturbed, even by dreams, death will be an unspeakable gain. For if a person were to select the night in which his sleep is undisturbed, even by dreams, and were to compare with this the other days and nights of his life, and then were to tell us how many days and nights he had passed in the course of his life better and more pleasantly than this one, I will not say a private man, but even the great king will not find many such days or nights when compared with the others. Now, if death be of such a nature, I say that to die is gain, for eternity is then only a single night. But if death is the journey to another place, and there, as men say, all the dead abide, what good, O my friends and judges, can be greater than this? If indeed, when the pilgrim arrives in the world below, he is delivered from the professors of justice in this world, and finds the true judges who are said to give judgment there, Minos and Rhadamanthus and Aecus and Triptolemus and other sons of God who are righteous in their own life, that pilgrimage will be worth making. What would not a man give if he might converse with Orpheus and Musaeus and Hesiod and Homer? Nay, if this be true, let me die again and again. I myself, too, shall have a wonderful interest in their meeting and conversing with Palamedes, and Ajax the son of Telamon, and any other ancient hero who has suffered death through an unjust judgment. And there will be no small pleasure, as I think, in comparing my own sufferings with theirs. Above all, I shall then be able to continue my search into true and false knowledge, as in this world, so also in the next, and I shall find out who is wise, and who pretends to be wise and is not. What would not a man give, O judges, to be able to examine the leader of the great Trojan expedition, or Odysseus, or Sisyphus, or numberless others, men and women too? What infinite delight would there be in conversing with them and asking them questions? In another world, they do not put a man to death for asking questions. Assuredly not. For besides being happier than we are, they will be immortal, if what is said is true. Wherefore, O judges, be of good cheer about death, and know of a certainty that no evil can happen to a good man, either in life or after death. He and his are not neglected by the gods, nor has my own approaching end happened by mere chance. But I see clearly that the time had arrived when it was better for me to die and be released from trouble. Wherefore the oracle gave me no sign, for which reason also I am not angry with my condemners or with my accusers. They have done me no harm, although they did not mean to do me any good, and for this I may gently blame them. Still I have a favor to ask of them. When my sons are grown up, I would ask you, O my friends, to punish them, and I would have you trouble them as I have troubled you, if they seem to care about riches or anything more than about virtue. And if they pretend to be something when they are really nothing, then reprove them, as I have reproved you, for not caring about that for which they ought to care, and thinking that they are something when they are really nothing. And if you do this, both I and my sons will have received justice at your hands. The hour of departure has arrived, and we go our ways. I to die, and you to live. Which is better, God only knows. End of Apology by Plato. Crito by Plato. Persons of the dialogue: Socrates, Crito. Scene: the prison of Socrates. Why have you come at this hour, Crito? It must be quite early. Yes, certainly. But what is the exact time? The dawn is breaking. I wondered that the keeper of the prison would let you in. He knows me, because I often come, Socrates. Moreover, I have done him a kindness. And are you only just arrived? No, I came some time ago. Then why did you sit and say nothing instead of at once awakening me? I should not have liked myself, Socrates, to be in such great trouble and unrest as you are. Indeed, I should not. I have been watching with amazement your peaceful slumbers, and for that reason I did not awake you, because I wish to minimize the pain. I have always thought you to be of a happy disposition, but never did I see anything like the easy, tranquil manner in which you bear this calamity. Why, Crito, when a man has reached my age, he ought not to be repining at the approach of death. And yet other old men find themselves in similar misfortunes, and age does not prevent them from repining. That is true, but you have not told me why you come at this early hour. I come to bring you a message which is sad and painful, not, as I believe, to yourself, but to all of us who are your friends, and saddest of all, to me. What? Has the ship come from Delos, on the arrival of which I am to die? No, the ship has not actually arrived, but she will probably be here today, as persons who have come from Sunium tell me that they have left her there, and therefore tomorrow, Socrates, will be the last day of your life. Very well, Crito. If such is the will of God, I am willing. But my belief is that there will be a delay of a day. Why do you think so? I will tell you. I am to die on the day after the arrival of the ship. Yes, that is what the authorities say. But I do not think that the ship will be here until tomorrow. This I infer from a vision which I had last night, or rather only just now, when you fortunately allowed me to sleep. And what was the nature of the vision? There appeared to me the likeness of a woman, fair and comely, clothed in bright raiment, who called to me and said, "O Socrates, the third day hence to Phthia shalt thou go." What a singular dream, Socrates! There can be no doubt about the meaning, Crito, I think. Yes, the meaning is only too clear. But oh, my dear Socrates, let me entreat you once more to take my advice and escape. For if you die, I shall not only lose a friend who can never be replaced, but there is another evil. People who do not know you and me will believe that I might have saved you if I had been willing to give money, but that I did not care. Now, can there be a worse disgrace than this, that I should be thought to value money more than the life of a friend? For the many will not be persuaded that I wanted you to escape, and that you refused. But why, my dear Crito, should we care about the opinion of the many? Good men, and they are the only persons who are worth considering, will think of these things truly as they occurred. But you see, Socrates, that the opinion of the many must be regarded, for what is now happening shows that they can do the greatest evil to anyone who has lost their good opinion. I only wish it were so, Crito, and that the many could be the greatest evil. For then they would also be able to do the greatest good, and what a fine thing this would be. But in reality, they can do neither, for they cannot make a man either wise or foolish, and whatever they do is the result of chance. Well, I will not dispute with you, but please to tell me, Socrates, whether you are not acting out of regard to me and your other friends. Are you not afraid that if you escape from prison we may get into trouble with the informers for having stolen you away, and lose either the whole or a great part of our property, or that even a worse evil may happen to us. Now if you fear on our account, be at ease, for in order to save you, we ought surely to run this or even a greater risk. Be persuaded then, and do as I say. Yes, Crito, that is one fear which you mention, but by no means the only one. Fear not. There are persons who are willing to get you out of prison at no great cost, and as for the informers, they are far from being exorbitant in their demands. A little money will satisfy them. My means, which are certainly ample, are at your service, and if you have a scruple about spending all mine, here are strangers who will give you the use of theirs, and one of them, Simmias the Theban, has brought a large sum of money for this very purpose, and Cebes and many others are prepared to spend their money in helping you to escape. I say, therefore, do not hesitate on our account, and do not say, as you did in the court, that you will have a difficulty in knowing what to do with yourself anywhere else. For men will love you in other places to which you may go, and not in Athens only. There are friends of mine in Thessaly, if you like to go to them, who will value and protect you, and no Thessalian will give you any trouble. Nor can I think that you are all justified, Socrates, in betraying your own life when you might be saved. In acting thus, you are playing into the hands of your enemies, who are hurrying on your destruction. And further, I should say that you are deserting your own children, for you might bring them up and educate them, instead of which you go away and leave them, and they will have to take their chance. And if they do not meet with the usual fate of orphans, there will be small thanks to you. No man should bring children into the world who is unwilling to persevere to the end in their nurture and education. But you appear to be choosing the easier part, not the better and manlier, which would have been more becoming in one who professes to care for virtue in all his actions, like yourself. And indeed, I am ashamed not only of you, but of us who are your friends, when I reflect that the whole business will be attributed entirely to our want of courage. The trial need never have come on, or might have been managed differently, and this last act, or crowning folly, will seem to have occurred through our negligence and cowardice, who might have saved you if we had been good for anything. And you might have saved yourself, for there was no difficulty at all. See now, Socrates, how sad and discreditable are the consequences, both to us and you. Make up your mind then, or rather have your mind already made up, for the time of deliberation is over, and there is only one thing to be done, which must be done this very night, and if we delay at all, will be no longer practicable or possible. I beseech you, therefore, Socrates, be persuaded by me, and do as I say. Dear Crito, your zeal is invaluable, if a right one. But if wrong, the greater the zeal, the greater the danger. And therefore we ought to consider whether I shall or shall not do as you say. For I am, and always have been, one of those natures who must be guided by reason, whatever the reason may be, which, upon reflection, appears to me to be the best. And now that this chance has befallen me, I cannot repudiate my own words. The principles which I have hitherto honored and revered I still honor, and unless we can at once find other and better principles, I am certain not to agree with you. No, not even if the power of the multitude could inflict many more imprisonments, confiscations, deaths, frightening us like children with hobgoblin terrors. What will be the fairest way of considering the question? Shall I return to your old argument about the opinions of men? We were saying that some of them are to be regarded and others not. Now, were we right in maintaining this before I was condemned? And has the argument which was once good now proved to be talk for the sake of talking, mere childish nonsense? That is what I want to consider with your help, Crito. Whether, under my present circumstances, the argument appears to be in any way different or not, and is to be allowed by me or disallowed. That argument, which, as I believe, is maintained by many persons of authority, was to the effect, as I was saying, that the opinions of some men are to be regarded, and of other men not to be regarded. Now you, Crito, are not going to die tomorrow. At least, there is no human probability of this, and therefore you are disinterested and not liable to be deceived by the circumstances in which you are placed. Tell me, then, whether I am right in saying that some opinions, and the opinions of some men only, are to be valued, and that other opinions, and the opinions of other men, are not to be valued. I ask you whether I was right in maintaining this. Certainly. The good are to be regarded, and not the bad? Yes. And the opinions of the wise are good, and the opinions of the unwise are evil? Certainly. And what was said about another matter? Is the pupil who devotes himself to the practice of gymnastics supposed to attend to the praise and blame and opinion of every man, or of one man only, his physician or trainer, whoever he may be? Of one man only. And he ought to fear the censure and welcome the praise of that one only, and not of the many. Clearly so. And he ought to act and train and eat and drink in the way which seems good to his single master, who has understanding, rather than according to the opinion of all other men put together. True. And if he disobeys and disregards the opinion and approval of the one, and regards the opinion of the many who have no understanding, will he not suffer evil? Certainly he will. And what will the evil be, whither tending, and what affecting in the disobedient person? Well, clearly affecting the body. That is what is destroyed by the evil. Very good. And is not this true, Crito, of other things, which we need not separately enumerate? In questions of just and unjust, fair and foul, good and evil, which are the subjects of our present consultation, ought we to follow the opinion of the many and to fear them, or the opinion of the one man who has understanding? Ought we not to fear and reverence him more than all the rest of the world? And if we desert him, shall we not destroy and injure that principle in us which may be assumed to be improved by justice and deteriorated by injustice? There is such a principle. Certainly there is, Socrates. Take a parallel instance. If, acting under the advice of those who have no understanding, we destroy that which is improved by health and is deteriorated by disease, would life be worth having? And that which has been destroyed is the body? Yes. Could we live, having an evil and corrupted body? Certainly not. And will life be worth having, if that higher part of man be destroyed, which is improved by justice and depraved by injustice? Do we suppose that principle, whatever it may be in man, which has to do with justice and injustice, to be inferior to the body? Certainly not. More honorable than the body. Far more. Then, my friend, we must not regard what the many say of us, but what he, the one man who has understanding of just and unjust, will say, and what the truth will say. And therefore you begin in error when you advise that we should regard the opinion of the many about just and unjust, good and evil, honorable and dishonorable. Well, someone will say, but the many can kill us. Yes, Socrates, that will clearly be the answer. And it is true. But still, I find with surprise that the old argument is unshaken as ever, and I should like to know whether I may say the same of another proposition, that not life, but a good life is to be chiefly valued. Yes, that also remains unshaken. And a good life is equivalent to a just and honorable one? That holds also? Yes, it does. From these premises, I proceed to argue the question whether I ought or ought not to try and escape without the consent of the Athenians. And if I am clearly right in escaping, then I will make the attempt. But if not, I will abstain. The other considerations which you mention of money and loss of character and the duty of educating one's children are, I fear, only the doctrines of the multitude, who would be as ready to restore people to life, if they were able, as they are to put them to death, and with as little reason. But now, since the argument has thus far prevailed, the only question which remains to be considered is whether we shall do rightly, either in escaping or in suffering others to aid in our escape and paying them in money and thanks, or whether in reality we shall not do rightly. And if the latter, then death or any other calamity which may ensue on my remaining here must not be allowed to enter into the calculation. I think that you are right, Socrates. How then shall we proceed? Let us consider the matter together, and do you either refute me if you can, and I will be convinced, or else cease, my dear friend, from repeating to me that I ought to escape against the wishes of the Athenians, for I highly value your attempts to persuade me to do so, but I may not be persuaded against my own better judgment. And now, please to consider my first position, and try how you can best answer me. I will. Are we to say that we are never intentionally to do wrong, or that in one way we ought, and in another way we ought not to do wrong, or is doing wrong always evil and dishonorable, as I was just now saying, as has already been acknowledged by us? Are all our former admissions, which were made within a few days, to be thrown away? And have we, at our age, been earnestly discoursing with one another all our life long, only to discover that we are no better than children? Or, in spite of the opinion of the many, and in spite of the consequences, whether better or worse, shall we insist on the truth of what was then said, that injustice is always an evil and dishonor to him who acts unjustly? Shall we say so or not? Yes. Then we must do no wrong? Certainly not. Nor, when injured, injure in return, as many imagine, for we must injure no one at all. Clearly not. Again, Crito, may we do evil? Surely not, Socrates. And what of doing evil in return for evil, which is the morality of the many? Is that just or not? Not just. For doing evil to another is the same as injuring him. Very true. Then we ought not to retaliate or render evil for evil to anyone, whatever evil we may have suffered from him. But I would have you consider, Crito, whether you really mean what you are saying. For this opinion has never been held, and never will be held, by any considerable number of persons. And those who are agreed, and those who are not agreed upon this point, have no common ground, and can only despise one another when they see how widely they differ. Tell me, then, whether you agree with and assent to my first principle, that neither injury nor retaliation, nor warding off evil by evil is ever right. And shall that be the premise of our argument? Or do you decline and dissent from this? For so I have ever thought, and continue to think. But if you are of another opinion, let me hear what you have to say. If, however, you remain of the same mind as formerly, I will proceed to the next step. You may proceed, for I have not changed my mind. Then I will go on to the next point, which may be put in the form of a question. Ought a man to do what he admits to be right, or ought he to betray the right? He ought to do what he thinks right. But if this is true, what is the application? In leaving the prison against the will of the Athenians, do I wrong any? Or rather, do I not wrong those whom I ought least to wrong? Do I not desert the principles which were acknowledged by us to be just? What do you say? I cannot tell, Socrates, for I do not know. Then consider the matter in this way. Imagine that I am about to play truant. You may call the proceeding by any name which you like, and the laws and the government come and interrogate. Tell us, Socrates, they say, what are you about? Are you not going, by an act of yours, to overturn us, the laws and the whole state, as far as in you lies? Do you imagine that a state can subsist and not be overthrown, in which the decisions of the law have no power, but are set aside and trampled upon by individuals? What will be your answer, Crito, to these and the like words? Anyone, and especially a rhetorician, will have a good deal to say on behalf of the law which requires a sentence to be carried out. He will argue that this law should not be set aside, and shall we reply, yes, but the state has injured us and given an unjust sentence? Suppose I say that. Very good, Socrates. And was that our agreement with you, the law would answer, or were you to abide by the sentence of the state? And if I were to express my astonishment at their words, the law would probably add, Answer, Socrates, instead of opening your eyes. You are in the habit of asking and answering questions. Tell us, what complaint have you to make against us which justifies you in attempting to destroy us and the state? In the first place, did we not bring you into existence? Your father married your mother by our aid and begat you. Say whether you have any objection to urge against those of us who regulate marriage. None, I should reply. Or against those of us who after birth regulate the nature and education of children, in which you also were trained. Were not the laws, which have the charge of education, right in commanding your father to train you in music and gymnastic? Right, I should reply. Well then, since you were brought into the world and nurtured and educated by us, can you deny in the first place that you are our child and slave, as your fathers were before you? And if this is true, you are not on equal terms with us. Nor can we think that you have a right to do to us what we are doing to you. Would you have any right to strike or revile or do any other evil to your father or your master, if you had one, because you have been struck or reviled by him, or received some other evil at his hands? You would not say this. And because we think right to destroy you, do you think that you have any right to destroy us in return, and your country, as far as in you lies? Will you, O professor of true virtue, pretend that you are justified in this? Has a philosopher like you failed to discover that our country is more to be valued and higher and holier far than mother or father or any ancestor, and more to be regarded in the eyes of the gods and of men of understanding? Also to be soothed and gently and reverently entreated when angry, even more than a father, and either to be persuaded, or if not persuaded, to be obeyed. And when we are punished by her, whether with imprisonment or stripes, the punishment is to be endured in silence. And if she lead us to wounds or death in battle, thither we follow as is right. Neither may anyone yield or retreat or leave his rank, but whether in battle or in a court of law or in any other place, he must do what his city and his country order him, or he must change their view of what is just. And if he may do no violence to his father or mother, much less may he do violence to his country. What answer shall we make to this, Crito? Do the laws speak truly, or do they not? I think that they do. Then the laws will say, Consider, Socrates, if we speak truly, that in your present attempt you are going to do us an injury. For, having brought you into the world, and nurtured and educated you, and given you and every other citizen a share in every good which we had to give, we further proclaim to any Athenian, by the liberty which we allow him, that if he does not like us when he has become of age, and has seen the ways of the city, and made our acquaintance, he may go where he pleases, and take his goods with him. None of us laws will forbid him or interfere with him. Anyone who does not like us in the city, and who wants to emigrate to a colony or to another city, may go where he likes, retaining his property. But he who has experience of the manner in which we order justice and administer the state, and still remains, has entered into an implied contract that he will do as we command him. And he who disobeys us is, as we maintain, thrice wrong. First, because in disobeying us he is disobeying his parents. Secondly, because we are the authors of his education. And thirdly, because he has made an agreement with us that he will duly obey our commands. And he neither obeys them nor convinces us that our commands are unjust. And we do not brutally impose them, but give him the alternative of obeying or convincing us. That is what we offer, and he does neither. These are the sort of accusations to which, as we were saying, you, Socrates, will be exposed if you accomplish your intentions, you above all other Athenians. Suppose now I ask why I rather than anybody else. They will justly retort upon me that I, above all other men, have acknowledged the agreement. There is clear proof, they will say, Socrates, that we and the city were not displeasing to you. Of all Athenians, you have been the most constant resident in the city, which, as you never leave, you may be supposed to love. For you never went out of the city, either to see the games, except once when you went to the Isthmus, or to any other place, unless when you were on military service, nor did you travel as other men do. Nor had you any curiosity to know other states or their laws. Your affections did not go beyond us and our state. We were your especial favorites, and you acquiesced in our government of you. And here in this city you begat your children, which is a proof of your satisfaction. Moreover, you might, in the course of the trial, if you had liked, have fixed the penalty at banishment. The state which refuses to let you go now would have let you go then. But you pretended that you preferred death to exile, and that you were not unwilling to die. And now you have forgotten these fine sentiments, and pay no respect to us, the laws, of whom you are the destroyer, and are doing what only a miserable slave would do, running away and turning your back upon the compacts and agreements which you made as a citizen. And first of all, answer this very question. Are you right in saying that you agreed to be governed according to us in deed, and not in word only? Is that true or not? How shall we answer, Crito? Must we not assent? We cannot help it, Socrates. Then will they not say, you, Socrates, are breaking the covenants and agreements which you made with us at your leisure, not in any haste or under any compulsion or deception, but after you have had 70 years to think of them, during which time you were at liberty to leave the city, if we were not to your mind, or if our covenants appeared to you to be unfair. You had your choice, and might have gone either to Lacedaemon or Crete, both which states are often praised by you for their good government, or to some other Hellenic or foreign state. Whereas you, above all other Athenians, seems to be so fond of the state, or in other words, of us, her laws, and who would care about a state which has no laws, that you never stirred out of her. The halt, the blind, the maimed were not more stationary in her than you were, and now you run away, forsake your agreements. Not so, Socrates, if you will take our advice. Do not make yourself ridiculous by escaping out of the city. For just consider, if you transgress and err in this sort of way, what good will you do either to yourself or to your friends? That your friends will be driven into exile and deprived of citizenship, or will lose their property, is tolerably certain. And you yourself, if you fly to one of the neighboring cities, as for example Thebes or Megara, both of which are well governed, will come to them as an enemy, Socrates, and their government will be against you, and all patriotic citizens will cast an evil eye upon you as a subverter of the laws. And you will confirm in the minds of the judges the justice of their own condemnation of you. For he who is a corrupter of the laws is more than likely to be a corrupter of the young and foolish portion of mankind. Will you then flee from well-ordered cities and virtuous men? And is existence worth having on these terms? Or will you go to them without shame and talk to them, Socrates? And what will you say to them? What will you say here about virtue and justice and institutions and laws being the best things among men? Would that be decent of you? Surely not. But if you go away from well-governed states to Crito's friends in Thessaly, where there is great disorder and license, they will be charmed to hear the tale of your escape from prison, set off with ludicrous particulars of the manner in which you were wrapped in a goatskin or some other disguise, and metamorphosed as the manner is of runaways. But will there be no one to remind you that in your old age you were not ashamed to violate the most sacred laws from a miserable desire of a little more life? Perhaps not, if you keep them in a good temper. But if they are out of temper, you will hear many degrading things. You will live, but how? As the flatterer of all men and the servant of all men, and doing what? Eating and drinking in Thessaly, having gone abroad in order that you may get a dinner. And where will be your fine sentiments about justice and virtue? Say that you wish to live for the sake of your children. You want to bring them up and educate them. Will you take them into Thessaly and deprive them of Athenian citizenship? Is this the benefit which you will confer upon them? Or are you under the impression that they will be better cared for and educated here if you are still alive, although absent from them? For your friends will take care of them. Do you fancy that if you are an inhabitant of Thessaly, they will take care of them? And if you are an inhabitant of the other world, they will not take care of them? Nay, but if they who call themselves friends are good for anything, they will. To be sure they will. Listen then, Socrates, to us who have brought you up. Think not of life and children first, and of justice afterwards, but of justice first, that you may be justified before the princes of the world below. For neither will you, nor any that belong to you, be happier or holier or juster in this life, or happier in another, if you do as Crito bids. Now you depart in innocence, a sufferer, and not a doer of evil, a victim, not of the laws, but of men. But if you go forth, returning evil for evil and injury for injury, breaking the covenants and agreements which you have made with us, and wronging those whom you ought least of all to wrong, that is to say, yourself, your friends, your country, and us, we shall be angry with you while you live, and our brethren, the laws in the world below, will receive you as an enemy. For they will know that you have done your best to destroy us. Listen then to us, and not to Crito. This, dear Crito, is the voice which I seem to hear murmuring in my ears, like the sound of the flute in the ears of the mystic. That voice, I say, is humming in my ears, and prevents me from hearing any other. And I know that anything more which you may say will be in vain. Yet speak, if you have anything to say. I have nothing to say, Socrates. Leave me then, Crito, to fulfill the will of God, and to follow whither he leads. End of Crito. Read by Bob Neufeld. Part 1 of Phaedo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Phaedo by Plato. Translated by Benjamin Jowett. Part 1. Persons of the dialogue. Phaedo, who is the narrator of the dialogue to Echecrates of Phlius, Socrates, Apollodorus, Simmias, Cebes, Crito, and an attendant of the prison. Scene: the prison of Socrates. Place of the narration: Phlius. Echecrates. Were you yourself, Phaedo, in the prison with Socrates on the day when he drank the poison? Yes, Echecrates, I was. I should so like to hear about his death. What did he say in his last hours? We were informed that he died by taking poison, but no one knew anything more. For no Philasian ever goes to Athens now, and it is a long time since any stranger from Athens has found his way hither, so that we had no clear account. Did you not hear of the proceedings at the trial? Yes, someone told us about the trial. And we could not understand why, having been condemned, he should have been put to death not at the time, but long afterwards. What was the reason of this? An accident, Echecrates. The stern of the ship which the Athenians sent to Delos happened to have been crowned on the day before he was tried. What is this ship? It is the ship in which, according to Athenian tradition, Theseus went to Crete when he took with him the 14 youths, and was the savior of them and of himself. And they were said to have vowed to Apollo at the time that if they were saved, they would send a yearly mission to Delos. Now this custom still continues, and the whole period of the voyage to and from Delos, beginning when the priest of Apollo crowns the stern of the ship, is a holy season, during which the city is not allowed to be polluted by public executions. And when the vessel is detained by contrary winds, the time spent in going and returning is very considerable. As I was saying, the ship was crowned on the day before the trial, and this was the reason why Socrates lay in prison and was not put to death until long after he was condemned. What was the manner of his death, Phaedo? What was said or done? And which of his friends were with him? Or did the authorities forbid them to be present, so that he had no friends near him when he died? No, there were several of them with him. If you have nothing to do, I wish that you would tell me what passed, exactly as you can. I have nothing at all to do, and will try to gratify your wish. To be reminded of Socrates is always the greatest delight to me, whether I speak myself or hear another speak of him. You will have listeners who are of the same mind with you, and I hope that you will be as exact as you can. I had a singular feeling at being in his company, for I could hardly believe that I was present at the death of a friend, and therefore I did not pity him, Echecrates. He died so fearlessly, and his words and bearing were so noble and gracious, that to me he appeared blessed. I thought that in going to the other world he could not be without a divine call, and that he would be happy, if any man ever was, when he arrived there. And therefore I did not pity him as might have seemed natural at such an hour. But I had not the pleasure which I usually feel in philosophical discourse, for philosophy was the theme of which we spoke. I was pleased, but in the pleasure there was also a strange admixture of pain, for I reflected that he was soon to die, and this double feeling was shared by us all. We were laughing and weeping by turns, especially the excitable Apollodorus. You know the sort of man? Yes. He was quite beside himself, and I and all of us were greatly moved. Who were present? Of native Athenians there were, besides Apollodorus, Critobulus and his father Crito, Hermogenes, Epigenes, Aeschines, and Tisthenes, likewise Ctesippus of the Demi of Paeania, Menexenus, and some others. Plato, if I'm not mistaken, was ill. Were there any strangers? Yes, there were. Simmias the Theban, and Cebes, and Phaedondes, Euclid and Terpsion, who came from Megara. And was Aristippus there, and Cleombrotus? No, they were said to be at Aegina. Anyone else? I think that these were nearly all. Well, and what did you talk about? I will begin at the beginning, and endeavor to repeat the entire conversation. On the previous days we had been in the habit of assembling early in the morning at the court in which the trial took place, and which is not far from the prison. There we used to wait, talking with one another until the opening of the doors, for they were not opened very early. Then we went in, and generally passed the day with Socrates. On the last morning we assembled sooner than usual, having heard on the day before, when we quitted the prison in the evening, that the sacred ship had come from Delos, and so we arranged to meet very early at the accustomed place. On our arrival, the jailer who answered the door, instead of admitting us, came out and told us to stay until he called us. For the 11, he said, are now with Socrates. They are taking off his chains and giving orders that he is to die today. He soon returned and said that we might come in. On entering, we found Socrates just released from chains, and Xanthippe, whom you know, sitting by him and holding his child in her arms. When she saw us, she uttered a cry and said, as women will, "Oh, Socrates, this is the last time that either you will converse with your friends, or they with you." Socrates turned to Crito and said, "Crito, let someone take her home." Some of Crito's people accordingly led her away, crying out and beating herself. And when she was gone, Socrates, sitting up on the couch, bent and rubbed his leg, saying as he was rubbing, "How singular is the thing called pleasure, and how curiously related to pain, which might be thought to be the opposite of it. For they are never present to a man at the same instant, and yet he who pursues either is generally compelled to take the other. The bodies are two, but they are joined by a single head. And I cannot help thinking that if Aesop had remembered them, he would have made a fable about God trying to reconcile their strife, and how, when he could not, he fastened their heads together. And this is the reason why when one comes, the other follows, as I know by my own experience now, when after the pain in my leg which was caused by the chain, pleasure appears to succeed." Upon this Cebes said, "I am glad, Socrates, that you have mentioned the name of Aesop, for it reminds me of a question which has been asked by many, and was asked of me only the day before yesterday by Evenus the poet. He will be sure to ask it again, and therefore, if you would like me to have an answer ready for him, you may as well tell me what I should say to him. He wanted to know why you, who never before wrote a line of poetry, now that you are in prison, are turning Aesop's fables into verse, and also composing that hymn in honor of Apollo." "Tell him, Cebes," he replied, "what is the truth, that I had no idea of rivaling him or his poems. To do so, as I knew, would be no easy task. But I wanted to see whether I could purge away a scruple which I felt about the meaning of certain dreams. In the course of my life I have often had intimations in dreams that I should compose music. The same dream came to me sometimes in one form, sometimes in another, but always saying the same or nearly the same words. 'Cultivate and make music,' said the dream. And hitherto I had imagined that this was only intended to exhort and encourage me in the study of philosophy, which has been the pursuit of my life, and is the noblest and best of music. The dream was bidding me do what I was already doing, in the same way that the competitor in a race is bidden by the spectators to run when he is already running. But I was not certain of this, for the dream might have meant music in the popular sense of the word. And, being under the sentence of death, and the festival giving me a respite, I thought it would be safer for me to satisfy the scruple, and in obedience to the dream, to compose a few verses before I departed. And first I made a hymn in honor of the god of the festival, and then, considering that a poet, if he is really to be a poet, should not only put together words, but should invent stories, and that I have no invention, I took some fables of Aesop, which I had ready at hand, and which I knew they were the first I came upon, and turned them into verse. Tell this to Evenus, Cebes, and bid him be of good cheer. Say that I would have him come after me, if he be a wise man, and not tarry, and that to-day I am likely to be going, for the Athenians say that I must. Simmias said, What a message for such a man! Having been a frequent companion of his, I should say that, as far as I know him, he will never take your advice, unless he is obliged. Why, said Socrates, is not Evenus a philosopher? I think that he is, said Simmias. Then he, or any man who has the spirit of philosophy, will be willing to die, but he will not take his own life, for that is held to be unlawful. Here he changed his position, and put his legs off the couch onto the ground, and during the rest of the conversation he remained sitting. Why do you say, inquired Cebes, that a man ought not to take his own life, but that the philosopher will be ready to follow the dying? Socrates replied, And have you, Cebes and Simmias, who are the disciples of Philolaus, never heard him speak of this? Yes, but his language was obscure, Socrates. My words, too, are only an echo, but there is no reason why I should not repeat what I have heard, and indeed, as I am going to another place, it is very meet for me to be thinking and talking of the nature of the pilgrimage which I am about to make. What can I do better in the interval between this and the setting of the sun? Then tell me, Socrates, why is suicide held to be unlawful? As I have certainly heard Philolaus, about whom you were just now asking, affirm when he was staying with us at Thebes, and there are others who say the same, although I have never understood what was meant by any of them. Do not lose heart, replied Socrates, and the day may come when you will understand. I suppose that you wonder why, when other things which are evil may be good at certain times and to certain persons, death is to be the only exception. And why, when a man is better dead, he is not permitted to be his own benefactor, but must wait for the hand of another. Very true, said Cebes, laughing gently, and speaking in his native Boeotian. I admit the appearance of inconsistency in what I am saying, but there may not be any real inconsistency after all. There is a doctrine whispered in secret that a man is a prisoner who has no right to open the door and run away. This is a great mystery which I do not quite understand. Yet I too believe that the gods are our guardians, and that we are a possession of theirs. Do you not agree? Yes, I quite agree, replied Cebes. And if one of your own possessions, an ox or an ass, for example, took the liberty of putting himself out of the way when you had given no intimation of your wish that he should die, would you not be angry with him, and would you not punish him if you could? Certainly, replied Cebes. Then, if we look at the matter thus, there may be reason in saying that a man should wait and not take his own life until God summons him, as he is now summoning me. Yes, Socrates, said Cebes, there seems to be truth in what you say, and yet how can you reconcile this seemingly true belief that God is our guardian and we his possessions, with the willingness to die which we were just now attributing to the philosopher? That the wisest of men should be willing to leave a service in which they are ruled by the gods who are the best of rulers is not reasonable. For surely no wise man thinks that when set at liberty he can take better care of himself than the gods take of him. A fool may perhaps think so. He may argue that he had better run away from his master, not considering that his duty is to remain to the end, and not to run away from the good, and that there would be no sense in running away. The wise man will want to be ever with him who is better than himself. Now this, Socrates, is the reverse of what was just now said. For upon this view the wise man should sorrow, and the fool rejoice at passing out of life. And certainly, added Simmias, the objection which he is now making does appear to me to have some force. For what can be the meaning of a truly wise man wanting to fly away and lightly leave a master who is better than himself? And I rather imagine that Sabis is referring to you. He thinks that you are too ready to leave us, and too ready to leave the gods whom you acknowledge to be our good masters. Yes, replied Socrates, there is reason in what you say. And so you think that I ought to answer your indictment as if I were in a court? We should like you to do so, said Simmias. Then I must try to make a more successful defence before you than I did when before the judges. For I am quite ready to admit, Simmias and Sabis, that I ought to be grieved at death, if I were not persuaded in the first place that I am going to other gods who are wise and good, of which I am as certain as I can be of any such matters, and secondly, though I am not so sure of this last, to men departed better than those whom I leave behind. And therefore I do not grieve as I might have done, for I have good hope that there is yet something remaining for the dead, and has been said of old, some far better thing for the good than for the evil. But do you mean to take away your thoughts with you, Socrates? Said Simmias. Will you not impart them to us? For they are a benefit in which we too are entitled to share. Moreover, if you succeed in convincing us, that will be an answer to the charge against yourself. I will do my best, replied Socrates. But you must first let me hear what Crito wants. He has long been wishing to say something to me. Only this, Socrates, replied Crito. The attendant, who is to give you the poison, has been telling me, and he wants me to tell you, that you are not to talk much. Talking, he says, increases heat, and this is apt to interfere with the action of the poison. Persons who excite themselves are sometimes obliged to take a second or even a third dose. Then, said Socrates, let him mind his business and be prepared to give the poison twice, or even thrice, if necessary. That is all. I knew quite well what you would say, replied Crito, but I was obliged to satisfy him. Never mind him, he said. End of Part 1. Part 2 of Phaedo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Bob Neufeld. Phaedo by Plato. Translated by Benjamin Jowett. Part 2. And now, O my judges, I desire to prove to you that the real philosopher has reason to be of good cheer when he is about to die, and that after death he may hope to obtain the greatest good in the other world. And how this may be, Simmias and Sabis, I will endeavour to explain, for I deem that the true votary of philosophy is likely to be misunderstood by other men. They do not perceive that he is always pursuing death and dying. And if this be so, and he has had the desire of death all his life long, why, when his time comes, should he repine at that which he has been always pursuing and desiring? Simmias said laughingly, Though not in a laughing humour, you have made me laugh, Socrates. For I cannot help thinking that the many, when they hear your words, will say how truly you have described philosophers, and our people at home will likewise say that the life which philosophers desire is in reality death, and that they have found them out to be deserving of the death which they desire. And they are right, Simmias, in thinking so, with the exception of the words, they have found them out. For they have not found out either what is the nature of that death which the true philosopher deserves, or how he deserves or desires death. But enough of them. Let us discuss the matter among ourselves. Do we believe that there is such a thing as death? To be sure, replied Simmias. Is it not the separation of soul and body? And to be dead is the completion of this, when the soul exists in herself, and is released from the body, and the body is released from the soul. What is this but death? Just so, he replied. There is another question, which will probably throw light on our present inquiry, if you and I can agree about it. Ought the philosopher to care about the pleasures, if they are to be called pleasures, of eating and drinking? Certainly not, answered Simmias. And what about the pleasures of love? Should he care for them? By no means. And will he think much of the other ways of indulging the body? For example, the acquisition of costly raiment, or sandals, or other adornments of the body. Instead of caring about them, does he not rather despise anything more than nature needs? What do you say? I should say that the true philosopher would despise them. Would you not say that he is entirely concerned with the soul, and not with the body? He would like, as far as he can, to get away from the body and turn to the soul. Quite true. In matters of this sort, philosophers, above all other men, may be observed in every sort of way to dissever the soul from the communion of the body. Very true. Whereas, Simmias, the rest of the world are of the opinion that to him who has no sense of pleasure, and no part in bodily pleasure, life is not worth having, and that he who is indifferent about them is as good as dead. That is also true. What again shall we say of the actual acquirement of knowledge? Is the body, if invited to share in the inquiry, a hinderer or a helper? I mean to say, have sight and hearing any truth in them? Are they not, as the poets are always telling us, inaccurate witnesses? And yet, if even they are inaccurate and indistinct, what is to be said of the other senses? For you will allow that they are the best of them. Oh, certainly. Then, when does the soul attain truth? For in attempting to consider anything in company with the body, she is obviously deceived. True. Then must not true existence be revealed to her in thought, if at all? Yes. And thought is best when the mind is gathered into herself, and none of these things trouble her, neither sounds, nor sights, nor pain, nor any pleasure, when she takes leave of the body, and has as little as possible to do with it, when she has no bodily sense or desire, but is aspiring after true being. Certainly. And in this the philosopher dishonours the body. His soul runs away from his body and desires to be alone and by herself? That is true. Well, but there is another thing, Simmias. Is there or is there not an absolute justice? Oh, surely there is. And an absolute beauty and absolute good? Of course. But did you ever behold any of them with your eyes? Certainly not. Or did you ever reach them with any other bodily sense? And I speak not of these alone, but of absolute greatness, and health, and strength, and of the essence or true nature of everything. Has the reality of them ever been perceived by you through the bodily organs? Or rather, is not the nearest approach to the knowledge of their several natures made by him who so orders his intellectual vision as to have the most exact conception of the essence of each thing which he considers? Certainly. And he attains to the purest knowledge of them who goes to each with the mind alone, not introducing or intruding in the act of thought, sight, or any other sense together with reason, but with the very light of the mind in her own clearness searches into the very truth of each. He who has got rid, as far as he can, of eyes and ears, and, so to speak, of the whole body, these being in his opinion distracting elements, which, when they infect the soul, hinder her from acquiring truth and knowledge. Who, if not he, is likely to attain the knowledge of true being? What you say has a wonderful truth in it, Socrates, replied Simmias. And when real philosophers consider all these things, will they not be led to make a reflection which they will express in words something like the following? Have we not found, they will say, a path of thought which seems to bring us and our arguments to the conclusion that while we are in the body, and while the soul is infected with the evils of the body, our desire will not be satisfied, and our desire is of the truth. For the body is a source of endless trouble to us by reason of the mere requirement of food, and is liable also to diseases which overtake and impede us in the search after true being. It fills us full of loves and lusts and fears and fancies of all kinds, and endless foolery, and in fact, as men say, takes away from us the power of thinking at all. Whence come wars and fightings and factions? Whence but from the body and the lusts of the body? Wars are occasioned by the love of money, and money has to be acquired for the sake and in service of the body. And by reason of all these impediments, we have no time to give to philosophy. And last and worst of all, even if we are at leisure and betake ourselves to some speculation, the body is always breaking in upon us, causing turmoil and confusion in our inquiries, and so amazing us that we are prevented from seeing the truth. It has been proved to us by experience that if we would have pure knowledge of anything, we must be quit of the body. The soul in herself must behold things in themselves, and then we shall attain the wisdom which we desire, and of which we say that we are lovers, not while we live, but after death. For if while in company with the body the soul cannot have pure knowledge, one of two things follows. Either knowledge is not to be attained at all, or, if at all, after death. For then, and not till then, the soul will be parted from the body, and exist in herself alone. In this present life, I reckon that we make the nearest approach to knowledge when we have the least possible intercourse or communion with the body, and are not surfeited with the bodily nature, but keep ourselves pure until the hour when God himself is pleased to release us. And thus, having got rid of the foolishness of the body, we shall be pure, and hold converse with the pure, and know of ourselves the clear light everywhere, which is no other than the light of truth. For the impure are not permitted to approach the pure. These are the sort of words, Simmias, which the true lovers of knowledge cannot help saying to one another, and thinking. You would agree, would you not? Undoubtedly, Socrates. But, O my friend, if this is true, there is great reason to hope that, going whither I go, when I have come to the end of my journey, I shall attain that which has been the pursuit of my life. And therefore I go on my way rejoicing, and not I only, but every other man who believes that his mind has been made ready, and that he is in a manner purified. Certainly. And what is purification but the separation of the soul from the body, as I was saying before? The habit of the soul gathering and collecting herself into herself from all sides out of the body, to dwelling in her own place alone, as in another life, so also in this, as far as she can, the release of the soul from the chains of the body. Very true. And this separation and release of the soul from the body is termed death? To be sure. And the true philosophers, and they only, are ever seeking to release the soul. Is not the separation and release of the soul from the body their especial study? That is true. And, as I was saying at first, There would be a ridiculous contradiction in men studying to live as nearly as they can in a state of death, and yet repining when it comes upon them. Clearly. And the true philosophers, Simmias, are always occupied in the practice of dying. Wherefore also to them least of all men is death terrible. Look at the matter thus. If they have been in every way the enemies of the body, and are wanting to be alone with the soul, when this desire of theirs is granted, how inconsistent would they be if they trembled and repined, instead of rejoicing at their departure at that place where, when they arrive, they hope to gain that which in life they desired, and this was wisdom, and at the same time to be rid of the company of their enemy. Many a man has been willing to go to the world below, animated by the hope of seeing there an earthly love, or wife, or son, and conversing with them. And will he who is a true lover of wisdom, and is strongly persuaded in like manner that only in the world below he can worthily enjoy her, still repine at death? Will he not depart with joy? Surely he will, O my friend, he be a true philosopher, for he will have a firm conviction that there, and there only, he can find wisdom in her purity. And if this be true, he would be very absurd, as I was saying, if he were afraid of death. He would indeed, replied Simmias. When you see a man who is repining at the approach of death, is not his reluctance a sufficient proof that he is not a lover of wisdom, but a lover of the body, and probably at the same time a love of either money or power, or both? Quite so. And is not courage, Simmias, a quality which is specially characteristic of the philosopher? Certainly. There is temperance, again, which even by the vulgar is supposed to consist in the control and regulation of the passions, and in the sense of superiority to them. Is not temperance a virtue belonging to those only who despise the body, and who pass their lives in philosophy? Most assuredly. For the courage and temperance of other men, if you will consider them, are really a contradiction. How so? Well, he said, you are aware that death is regarded by men in general as a great evil? Very true. And do not courageous men face death because they are afraid of yet greater evils? That is quite true. Then all but the philosophers are courageous only from fear, and because they are afraid. And yet that a man should be courageous from fear, and because he is a coward, is surely a strange thing. Very true. And are not the temperate exactly in the same case? They are temperate because they are intemperate, which might seem to be a contradiction, but is nevertheless the sort of thing which happens with this foolish temperance. For there are pleasures which they are afraid of losing, and in their desire to keep them, they abstain from some pleasures because they are overcome by others. And although to be conquered by pleasure is called by men intemperance, to them the conquest of pleasure consists in being conquered by pleasure. And that is what I mean by saying that, in a sense, they are made temperate through intemperance. Such appears to be the case. Yet the exchange of one fear or pleasure or pain for another fear or pleasure or pain, and of the greater for the less, as if they were coins, is not the exchange of virtue. Oh, my blessed Simmias, is there not one true coin for which all things ought to be exchanged? And that is wisdom. And only in exchange for this, and in company with this, is anything truly bought or sold, whether courage or temperance or justice. And is not all true virtue the companion of wisdom, no matter what fears or pleasures or other similar goods or evils may or may not attend her? But the virtue which is made up of these goods, when they are severed from wisdom and exchanged with one another, is a shadow of virtue only, nor is there any freedom or health or truth in her. But in the true exchange there is a purging away of all these things, and temperance and justice and courage and wisdom herself are the purgation of them. The founders of the mysteries would appear to have had a real meaning, and were not talking nonsense when they intimated in a figure long ago that he who passes unsanctified and uninitiated into the world below will lie in a slough, but that he who arrives there after initiation and purification will dwell with the gods. For many, they say in the mysteries, are the thyrsus-bearers and few are the mystics, meaning, as I interpret the words, the true philosophers, in the number of whom, during my whole life, I have been seeking, according to my ability, to find a place. Whether I have sought in the right way or not, and whether I have succeeded or not, I shall truly know in a little while, if God will, when I myself arrive in the other world. Such my belief. And therefore I maintain that I am right, Simmias and Cebes, in not grieving or repining at parting from you and my masters in this world. For I believe that I shall equally find good masters and friends in another world. But most men do not believe this saying. If then I succeed in convincing you by my defense better than I did the Athenian judges, it will be well. Cebes answered, I agree, Socrates, in the greater part of what you say, but in what concerns the soul, men are apt to be incredulous. They fear that when she has left the body her place may be nowhere, and that on the very day of death she may perish, come to an end, immediately on her release from the body, issuing forth dispersed like smoke or air, and in her flight vanishing away into nothingness. If she could only be collected into herself after she has obtained release from the evils from which you are speaking, there would be a good reason to hope, Socrates, that what you say is true. But surely it requires a great deal of argument and many proofs to show that when the man is dead, his soul yet exists, and has any force or intelligence. True, Cebes, said Socrates. And shall I suggest that we converse a little of the probabilities of these things? I am sure, said Cebes, that I should greatly like to know your opinion about them. I reckon, said Socrates, that no one who heard me now, not even if he were one of my old enemies, the comic poet, could accuse me of idle talking about matters in which I have no concern. If you please, then, we will proceed with the inquiry. End of Part 2. Part 3 of Phaedo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Bob Neufeld. Phaedo by Plato. Translated by Benjamin Jowett. Part 3. Suppose we consider the question whether the souls of men after death are or are not in the world below. There comes into my mind an ancient doctrine which affirms that they go from hence into the other world, and returning hither are again from the dead. Now, if it be true that the living come from the dead, then our souls must exist in the other world, for if not, how could they have been born again? And this would be conclusive, if there were any real evidence that the living are only born from the dead. But if this is not so, then other arguments will have to be adduced. Very true. Then let us consider the whole question, not in relation to man only, but in relation to animals generally, and to plants, and to everything of which there is generation, and the proof will be easier. Are not all things which have opposites generated out of their opposites? I mean such things as good and evil, just and unjust, and there are innumerable other opposites which are generated out of opposites. And I want to show that in all opposites there is of necessity a similar alternation. I mean to say, for example, that anything which becomes greater must have become greater after being less. True, and that which becomes less must have been once great, and then have become less. Yes, and the weaker is generated from the stronger, and the swifter from the slower. Very true. And the worse is from the better, and the more just is from the more unjust. Of course. And is this true of all opposites? And are we convinced that all of them are generated out of the opposites? Yes. And in this universal opposition of all things, are there not also two intermediate processes which are ever going on, from one to the other opposite and back again? Where there is a greater and a less, there is also an immediate process for increase and diminution, and that which grows is said to wax, and that which decays to wane. Yes, he said, and there are many other processes, such as division and composition, cooling and heating, which equally involve a passage into and out of one another, and this necessarily holds of all opposites, even though not always expressed in words. They are really generated out of one another, and there is a passing or process from one to the other of them. Very true. Well, and is there not an opposite of life, as sleep is the opposite of waking? True. And what is it? Death, he answered. And these, if they are opposites, are generated the one from the other, and have their two intermediate processes also? Of course. Now, said Socrates, I will analyze one of the two pairs of opposites which I have mentioned to you, and also its intermediate processes, and you shall analyze the other to me. One of them I term sleep, the other waking. The state of sleep is opposed to the state of waking, and out of sleeping, waking is generated, and out of waking, sleeping, and the process of generation is in the one case falling asleep, and in the other waking up. Do you agree? I entirely agree. Then, suppose that you analyze life and death to me in the same manner. Is not death opposed to life? Yes. Are they generated one from the other? Yes. And what is generated from the living? The dead. And what from the dead? I can only say and answer, the living. Then the living, whether things or persons, Sabes, are generated from the dead. That is clear. Then the inference is that our souls exist in the world below. That is true. And one of the two processes or generations is visible. For surely the act of dying is visible. Surely, he said. What then is to be the result? Shall we exclude the opposite process? And shall we suppose nature to walk on one leg only? Must we not rather assign to death some corresponding process of generation? Certainly. And what is that process? Return to life. And return to life, if there be such a thing, is the birth of the dead into the world of the living? Quite true. Then here is a new way by which we arrive at the conclusion that the living come from the dead, just as the dead come from the living. And this, if true, affords a most certain proof that the souls of the dead exist in some place out of which they come again. Yes, Socrates, he said, the conclusion seems to flow necessarily out of our previous admission, and that these admissions were not unfair, Sabes, he said, may be shown, I think, as follows. If generation were in a straight line only, and there were no compensation or circle in nature, no turn or return of elements into their opposites, then you know that all things would at last have the same form and pass into the same state, and there would be no more generation of them. What do you mean? A simple thing enough, which I will illustrate by the case of sleep. You know that if there were no alternation of sleeping and waking, the tale of the sleeping Endymion would in the end have no meaning, because all other things would be sleep too, and he would not be distinguishable from the rest. Or if there were composition only, and no division of substances, then the chaos of Anaxagoras would come again. And in like manner, my dear Sabes, If all things which partook of life were to die, and if they were dead, remained in the form of death, and did not come to life again, all would at last die. Nothing would be alive. What other result could there be? For if the living spring from any other thing, and they too die, must not all things at last be swallowed up in death? There is no escape, Socrates, said Cebes, and to me your argument seems to be absolutely true. Yes, he said, Cebes, it is, and must be so in my opinion. And we have not been deluded in making these admissions. But I am confident that there truly is such a thing as living again, and that the living spring from the dead, and that the souls of the dead are in existence, and that the good souls have a better portion than the evil. Cebes added, Your favorite doctrine, Socrates, that knowledge is simply recollection, if true, also necessarily implies a previous time in which we have learned that which we now recollect. But this would be impossible unless our soul had been in some place before existing in the form of man. Here, then, is another proof of the soul's immortality. But tell me, Cebes, said Simmias, interposing, what arguments are urged in favor of this doctrine of recollection? I am not very sure at the moment that I remember them. But one excellent proof, said Cebes, is afforded by questions. If you put a question to a person in a right way, he will give a true answer of himself. But how could he do this, unless there were knowledge and right reason already in him? And this is most clearly shown when he is taken to a diagram or to anything of that sort. But if, said Socrates, you are still incredulous, Simmias, I would ask you whether you may not agree with me when you look at the matter in another way. I mean, if you are still incredulous as to whether knowledge is recollection. Incredulous I am not, said Simmias, but I want to have this doctrine of recollection brought to my own recollection. And from what Cebes has said, I am beginning to recollect and be convinced. But I should still like to hear what you're going to say. This is what I would say, he replied. We should agree, if I am not mistaken, that what a man recollects he must have known at some previous time. Very true. And what is the nature of this knowledge or recollection? I mean to ask whether a person who, having seen or heard or in any way perceived of anything, knows not only that, but has a conception of something else, which is the subject, not of the same, but of some other kind of knowledge, may not be fairly said to recollect that of which he has the conception. What do you mean? I mean what I may illustrate by the following instance. The knowledge of a liar is not the same as the knowledge of a man. True. And yet what is the feeling of lovers when they recognize a lyre or a garment or anything else which the beloved has been in the habit of using? Do not they, from knowing the lyre, form in the mind's eye an image of the youth to whom the lyre belongs? And this is recollection. In like manner, anyone who sees Simmias may remember Sabi, and there are endless examples of the same thing. Endless indeed. And recollection is most commonly a process of recovering that which has been already forgotten through time and inattention. Very true. Well, and may you not also, from seeing the picture of a horse or a lyre, remember a man? And from the picture of Simmias, you may be led to remember Sabi. True. Or you may also be led to the recollection of Simmias himself. Quite so. And in all these cases, the recollection may be derived from things either like or unlike. A bit maybe. And when the recollection is derived from like things, then another consideration is sure to arise, which is whether the likeness in any degree falls short or not of that which is recollected. Very true. And shall we proceed a step further, and affirm that there is such a thing as equality, not of one piece of wood or stone with another, but that, over and above this, there is absolute equality? Shall we say so? Say so, yes, replied Simmias, and swear to it with all the confidence in life. And do we know the nature of this absolute essence? To be sure. And whence did we obtain our knowledge? Did we not see equalities of material things, such as pieces of wood and stones, and gather from them the idea of an equality which is different from them? For you will acknowledge that there is a difference. Or look at the matter in another way. Do not the same pieces of wood or stone appear at one time equal, and at another time unequal? Well, that is certain. But are real equals never unequal? Or is the idea of equality the same as of inequality? Impossible, Socrates. Then these so-called equals are not the same with the idea of equality? I should say clearly not, Socrates. And yet, from these equals, although differing from the idea of equality, you conceived and attained that idea. Very true, he said. Which might be like or might be unlike them. Yes, but that makes no difference. Whenever from seeing one thing you conceived another, whether like or unlike, there must surely have been an act of recollection. Very true. But what would you say of equal portions of wood and stone, or other material equals? And what is the impression produced by them? Are they equals in the same sense in which absolute equality is equal, or do they fall short of this perfect equality in a measure? Yes, he said, in a very great measure too. Must we not allow that when I or any one, looking at any object, observes that the thing which he sees aims at being some other thing, but falls short of, and cannot be the other thing, but is inferior, he who makes this observation must have had a previous knowledge of that to which the other, although similar, was inferior? Certainly. And has not this been our own case in the matter of equals and of absolute equality? Precisely. Then we must have known equality previously to the time when we first saw the material equals, and reflected that all these apparent equals strive to attain absolute equality, but fall short of it. Very true. And we recognize also that this absolute equality has only been known, and can only be known, through the medium of sight or touch, or of some other of the senses, which are all alike in this respect. Yes, Socrates, as far as the argument is concerned, one of them is the same as the other. From the senses, then, is derived the knowledge that all sensible things aim at an absolute equality of which they fall short? Yes. Then, before we begin to see or hear or perceive in any way, we must have had a knowledge of absolute equality, or we would not have referred to that standard the equals which are derived from the senses, for to that they all aspire, and of that they fall short. No other inference can be drawn from the previous statements. And did we not see and hear and have the use of our other senses as soon as we were born? Certainly. Then we must have acquired the knowledge of equality at some previous time. Yes, that is to say, before we were born, I suppose. True. And if we acquired this knowledge before we were born, and were born having the use of it, then we also knew before we were born, and at the instant of birth, not only the equal, or the greater, or the less, but all other ideas. For we are not speaking only of equality, but of beauty, goodness, justice, holiness, and of all which we stamp with the name of essence in the dialectical process, both when we ask and when we answer questions. Of all this we may certainly affirm that we acquired the knowledge before birth. We may. But if, after having acquired, we have not forgotten what in each case we acquired, then we must always have come into life having knowledge, and shall always continue to know as long as life lasts, for knowing is the acquiring and retaining knowledge, and not forgetting. Is not forgetting, Simeon, just the losing of knowledge? Quite true, Socrates. But if the knowledge which we acquired before birth was lost by us at birth, And if afterwards, by the use of the senses, we recovered what we previously knew, will not the process which we call learning be a recovering of the knowledge which is natural to us, and may not this be rightly termed recollection? Very true. So much is clear, that when we perceive something, either by the help of sight or hearing or some other sense, from that perception we are able to obtain a notion of some other thing like or unlike which is associated with it, but has been forgotten. Whence, as I was saying, one of two alternatives follows. Either we had this knowledge at birth, and continued to know through life, or after birth those who are said to learn only remember, and learning is simply recollection. Yes, that is quite true, Socrates. And which alternative, Simmias, do you prefer? Had we the knowledge at our birth, or did we recollect the things which we knew previously to our birth? I cannot decide at the moment. At any rate, you can decide whether he who has knowledge will or will not be able to render an account of his knowledge. What do you say? Certainly he will. But do you think that every man is able to give an account of these very matters about which we are speaking? Would that they could, Socrates, but I rather fear that tomorrow at this time there will no longer be any one alive who is able to give an account of them such as ought to be given. Then you are not of opinion, Simmias, that all men know these things? Certainly not. They are in process of recollecting that which they learned before? Certain. But when did our souls acquire this knowledge? Not since we were born as men? Certainly not, and therefore previously. Yes. Then, Simmias, our souls must also have existed without body before they were in the form of man, and must have had intelligence. Unless indeed you suppose, Socrates, that these notions are given us at the very moment of birth, for this is the only time which remains. Yes, my friend, but if so, when do we lose them? For they are not in us when we are born, that is admitted. Do we lose them at the moment of receiving them, or if not, at what other time? No, Socrates, I perceive that I was unconsciously talking nonsense. Then may we not say, Simmias, that if, as we are always repeating, there is an absolute beauty and goodness, and an absolute essence of all things, and if to this which is now discovered to have existed in our former state, we refer all sensations, and with this compare them, finding these ideas to be pre-existent and our inborn possession, then our souls must have had a prior existence. But if not, there would be no force in the argument. There is the same proof that these ideas must have existed before we were born, as that our souls existed before we were born. And if not the ideas, then not the souls. Yes, Socrates, I am convinced that there is precisely the same necessity for the one as for the other, and the argument retreats successfully to the position that the existence of the soul before birth cannot be separated from the existence of the essence of which you speak. For there is nothing which to my mind is so patent as that beauty, goodness, and the other notions of which you were just now speaking have a most real and absolute existence, and I am satisfied with the proof. Well, but is Cebes equally satisfied? For I must convince him too. I think, said Simmias, that Cebes is satisfied. Although he is the most incredulous of mortals, yet I believe that he is sufficiently convinced of the existence of the soul before birth. But that after death the soul will continue to exist is not yet proven even to my own satisfaction. I cannot get rid of the feeling of the many to which Cebes was referring, the feeling that when the man dies the soul will be dispersed, and that this may be the extinction of her. For admitting that she may have been born elsewhere, and framed out of other elements, and was in existence before entering the human body, why, after having entered in and gone out again, may she not herself be destroyed and come to an end? Very true, Simmias, said Cebes, About half of what was required has been proven, to wit, that our souls existed before we were born, that the soul will exist after death as well as before birth is the other half of which the proof is still wanting, and has to be supplied. When that is given, the demonstration will be complete. But that proof, Simmias and Sabes, has been already given, said Socrates. If you put the two arguments together, I mean this and the former one, in which we admitted that everything living is born of the dead. For if the soul exists before birth, and in coming to life and being born can be born only from death and dying, must she not after death continue to exist, since she has to be born again? Surely the proof which you desire has been already furnished. Still, I suspect that you and Simmias would be glad to probe the argument further. Like children, you are haunted with a fear that when the soul leaves the body, the wind may really blow her away and scatter her, especially if a man should happen to die in a great storm, and not when the sky is calm. Sabes answered with a smile, Then, Socrates, you must argue us out of our fears, and yet, strictly speaking, they are not our fears, but there is a child within us to whom death is a sort of hobgoblin. Him too we must persuade not to be afraid when he is alone in the dark. Socrates said, Let the voice of the charmer be applied daily until you have charmed away the fear. And where shall we find a good charmer of our fears, Socrates, when you are gone? Hellas, he replied, is a large place, Sabes, and has many good men, and there are barbarous races not a few. Seek for him among them all, far and wide, sparing neither pains nor money, for there is no better way of spending your money. And you must seek among yourselves too, for you will not find others better able to make the search. The search, replied Sabes, shall certainly be made. And now, if you please, let us return to the point of the argument at which we digressed. By all means, replied Socrates. What else should I please? Very good. End of Part 3. Part 4 of Phaedo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Bob Neufeld. Phaedo by Plato. Translated by Benjamin Jowett. Part 4. Must we not, said Socrates, ask ourselves what that is which, as we imagine, is liable to be scattered and about which we fear? And what again is that about which we have no fear? And then we may proceed further to inquire whether that which suffers dispersion is or is not of the nature of soul. Our hopes and fears as to our own souls will turn upon the answers to these questions. Very true, he said. Now, the compound or composite may be supposed to be naturally capable, as of being compounded, so also of being dissolved. But that which is uncompounded, and that only, must be, if anything is, indissoluble. Yes, I should imagine so, said Sabes. And the uncompounded may be assumed to be the same and unchanging, whereas the compound is always changing and never the same. I agree, he said. Then now let us return to the previous discussion. Is that idea or essence, which in the dialectical process we define as essence or true existence, whether essence of equality, beauty, or anything else, are these essences, I say, liable at times to some degree of change? Or are they each of them always what they are, having the same simple, self-existent and unchanging forms, not admitting of variation at all, or in any way, or at any time? They must always be the same, Socrates, replied Sabes. And what would you say of the many beautiful, whether men, or horses, or garments, or any other things which are named by the same names, and may be called equal or beautiful? Are they all unchanging and the same always, or quite the reverse? May they not rather be described as almost always changing and hardly ever the same, either with themselves or with one another? The latter, replied Cebes, they are always in a state of change, and these you can touch and see and perceive with the senses, but the unchanging things you can only perceive with the mind. They are invisible and are not seen. That is very true, he said. Well then, added Socrates, let us suppose that there are two sorts of existences, one seen, the other unseen. Let us suppose them. The seen is the changing, and the unseen is the unchanging. That may also be supposed. And further, is not one part of us body and another part soul? To be sure. And to which class is the body more alike and akin? Clearly to the seen, no one can doubt that. And is the soul seen or not seen? Not by man, Socrates. And what we mean by seen and not seen is that which is or is not visible to the eye of man? Yes, to the eye of man. And is the soul seen or not seen? Not seen. Unseen, then? Yes. Then the soul is more like to the unseen, and the body to the seen. That follows necessarily, Socrates. And were we saying not long ago that the soul, when using the body as an instrument of perception, that is to say, when using the sense of sight or hearing or some other sense, for the meaning of perceiving through the body is perceiving through the senses, were we not saying that the soul too is then dragged by the body into the region of the changeable, and wanders and is confused? The world spins round her, and she is like a drunkard when she touches change. Very true. And when returning into herself, she reflects, then she passes into the other world, the region of purity and eternity and immortality and unchangeableness, which are her kindred, and with them she ever lives when she is by herself, and is not let or hindered. Then she ceases from her erring ways, and being in communion with the unchanging, is unchanging. And this state of the soul is called wisdom? That is well and truly said, Socrates, he replied. And to which class is the soul more nearly alike and akin, as far as may be inferred from this argument, as well as from the preceding one? I think, Socrates, that in the opinion of every one who follows the argument, the soul will be infinitely more like the unchangeable. Even the most stupid person will not deny that. And the body is more like the changing. Yes. Yet, once more, consider the matter in another light. When the soul and body are united, then nature orders the soul to rule and govern, and the body to obey and serve. Now, which of these two functions is akin to the divine, and which to the mortal? Does not the divine appear to you to be that which naturally orders and rules, and the mortal to be that which is subject and servant? True. And which does the soul resemble? The soul resembles the divine, and the body the mortal. There can be no doubt of that, Socrates. Then reflect, Cebes. Of all which has been said, is not this the conclusion, that the soul is in the very likeness of the divine, and immortal, and intellectual, and uniform, and indissoluble, and unchangeable, and that the body is in the very likeness of the human, mortal and unintellectual, and multiform, and dissoluble, and changeable. Can this, my dear Cebes, be denied? It cannot. But if it be true, then is not the body liable to speedy dissolution, and is not the soul almost or altogether indissoluble? Certainly. And do you further observe that after a man is dead, the body, or visible part of him, which is lying in the visible world and is called a corpse, and would naturally be dissolved and decomposed and dissipated, is not dissolved or decomposed at once, but may remain for some time, nay, even for a long time, if the constitution be sound at the time of death, and the season of the year favorable. For the body, when shrunk and embalmed, as the manner is in Egypt, may remain almost entire through infinite ages, and even in decay there are still some portions, such as the bones and ligaments, which are practically indestructible. Do you agree? Yes. And is it likely that the soul, which is invisible, in passing to the place of the true Hades, which like her is invisible and pure and noble, and on her way to the good and wise God, whither, if God will, my soul is also soon to go, that the soul, I repeat, if this be her nature and origin, will be blown away and destroyed immediately on quitting the body, as many say? That can never be, my dear Simmias and Cebes. The truth rather is, that the soul which is pure at departing and draws after her no bodily taint, having never voluntary during life had connection with the body, which she is ever avoiding, herself gathered unto herself, and making such abstraction her perpetual study, which means that she has been a true disciple of philosophy, and therefore has in fact been always engaged in the practice of dying. For is not philosophy the practice of death? Certainly. That soul, I say, herself invisible, departs to the invisible world, to the divine and immortal and rational. Thither arriving, she is secure of bliss, and is released from the error and folly of men, their fears and wild passions, and all other human ills, and forever dwells, as they say of the initiated, in company with the gods. Is this not true, Cebes? Yes, said Cebes, beyond a doubt. But the soul which has been polluted, and is impure at the time of her departure, and is the companion and servant of the body always, and is in love with and fascinated by the body and by the desires and pleasures of the body, until she is led to believe that the truth only exists in bodily form, which a man may touch and see and taste, and use for the purposes of his lusts. The soul, I mean, accustomed to hate and fear and avoid the intellectual principle, which to the bodily eye is direct and invisible, and can be attained only by philosophy, do you suppose that a soul will depart pure and unalloyed? Impossible, he replied. She is held fast by the corporeal, which the continual association and constant care of the body have wrought into her nature. Very true. And this corporeal element, my friend, is heavy and weighty and earthy, and is that element of sight by which a soul is depressed and dragged down again into the visible world, because she is afraid of the invisible and of the world below, prowling about tombs and sepulchres, near which, as they tell us, are seen certain ghostly apparitions of souls which have not departed pure, but are cloyed with sight, and therefore visible. That is very likely, Socrates. Yes, that is very likely, Cebes. And these must be the souls, not of the good, but of the evil, which are compelled to wander about such places in payment of the penalty of their former evil way of life, and they continue to wander until, through the craving after the corporeal which never leaves them, they are imprisoned finally in another body, and they may be supposed to find their prisons in the same natures which they have had in their former lives. What natures do you mean, Socrates? What I mean is that men who have followed after gluttony and wantonness and drunkenness, and have had no thought of avoiding them, would pass into asses and animals of that sort. What do you think? I think such an opinion to be exceedingly probable. And those who have chosen the portion of injustice and tyranny and violence will pass into wolves or into hawks and kites. Whither else can we suppose them to go? Yes, said Cebes, with such natures beyond question. And there is no difficulty, he said, in assigning to all of them places answering to their several natures and propensities. There is not, he said. Some are happier than others. The happiest both in themselves and in the place to which they go are those who have practiced the civil and social virtues, which are called temperance and justice. and are acquired by habits and attention without philosophy and mind. Why are they the happiest? Because they may be expected to pass into some gentle and social kind which is like their own, such as bees or wasps or ants, or back into the form of man, and just and moderate men may be supposed to spring from them. Very likely. No one who has not studied philosophy, and who is not entirely pure at the time of his departure, is allowed to enter the company of the gods, but the lover of knowledge only. And this is the reason, Simmias and Cebes, why the true votaries of philosophy abstain from all fleshly lusts, and hold out against them, and refuse to give themselves up to them. Not because they fear poverty or the ruin of their families, like the lovers of money and the world in general, nor like the lovers of power and honor, because they dread the dishonor or disgrace of evil deeds. No, Socrates, that would not become them, said Cebes. No, indeed, he replied, and therefore they who have any care of their own souls, and do not merely love moulding and fashioning the body, say farewell to all this. They will not walk in the ways of the blind, and when philosophy offers them purification and release from evil, they feel that they ought not to resist her influence, and whither she leads, they turn and follow. What do you mean, Socrates? I will tell you, he said. The lovers of knowledge are conscious that the soul is simply fastened and glued to the body. Until philosophy received her, she could only view real existence through the bars of a prison, not in and through herself. She was wallowing in the mire of every sort of ignorance, and by reason of lust had become the principal accomplice in her own captivity. This was her original state, and then, as I was saying, and as the lovers of knowledge are well aware, philosophy, seeing how terrible was her confinement, of which she was to herself the cause, received and gently comforted her, and sought to release her, pointing out that the eye and the ear and the other senses are full of deception, and persuading her to retire from them, and abstain from all but the necessary use of them, and be gathered up and collected into herself, biding her trust in herself and her own pure apprehension of pure existence, and to mistrust whatever comes to her through other channels and is subject to variation. For such things are visible and tangible, but what she sees in her own nature is intelligible and invisible. And the soul of the true philosopher thinks that she ought not to resist this deliverance, and therefore abstains from pleasures and desires and pains and fears as far as she is able, reflecting that when a man has great joys or sorrows or fears or desires, he suffers from them not merely the sort of evil which might be anticipated, as for example the loss of his health or property which he has sacrificed to his lusts, but an evil greater far, which is the greatest and worst of all evils, and one of which he never thinks. What is it, Socrates? Said Cebes. The evil is that when the feeling of pleasure or pain is most intense, the evil is that when the feeling of pleasure or pain is most intense, every soul of man imagines the objects of this intense feeling to be then plainest and truest. But this is not so. They are really the things of sight. Very true. And is not this the state in which the soul is most enthralled by the body? How so? Why, because each pleasure and pain is a sort of nail which nails and rivets the soul to the body, until she becomes like the body, and believes that to be true which the body affirms to be true. And from agreeing with the body, and having the same delights, she is obliged to have the same habits and haunts, and is not likely ever to be pure at her departure to the world below, but is always infected by the body. And so she sinks into another body, and there germinates and grows, and has therefore no part in the communion of the divine and pure and simple. Most true, Socrates, answered Cebes. And this, Cebes, is the reason why the true lovers of knowledge are temperate and brave, and not for the reason which the world gives. Certainly not. Certainly not. The soul of a philosopher will reason in quite another way. She will not ask philosophy to release her, in order that, when released, she may deliver herself up again to the thraldom of pleasures and pains, doing her work only to be undone again, weaving instead of unweaving her Penelope's web. But she will calm passion, and follow reason, and dwell in the contemplation of her, beholding the true and divine, which is not a matter of opinion, and thence deriving nourishment. Thus she seeks to live while she lives, and after death she hopes to go to her own kindred and to that which is like her, and to be freed from human ills. Never fear, Simmias and Cebes, that a soul which has been thus nurtured and has had these pursuits will at her departure from the body be scattered and blown away by the winds, and be nowhere and nothing. When Socrates had done speaking, for a considerable time there was silence. He himself appeared to be meditating, as most of us were, on what had been said. Only Cebes and Simmias spoke a few words to one another, and Socrates, observing them, asked what they thought of the argument, and whether there was anything wanting. "For," said he, "there are many points still open to suspicion and attack, if any one were disposed to sift the matter thoroughly. Should you be considering some other matter, I say no more. But if you are still in doubt, do not hesitate to say exactly what you think, and let us have anything better which you can suggest. And if you think that I can be of any use, allow me to help you." Simmias said, "I must confess, Socrates, that doubts did arise in our minds, and each of us was urging and inciting the other to put the question which we wanted to have answered, and which neither of us liked to ask, fearing that our importunity might be troublesome under present at such a time." Socrates replied with a smile, "Oh, Simmias, what are you saying? I am not very likely to persuade other men that I do not regard my present situation as a misfortune, if I cannot even persuade you that I am no worse off now than at any other time in my life. Will you not allow that I have as much of the spirit or prophecy in me as the swans? For they, when they perceive that they must die, having sung all their life long, do then sing more lustily than ever, rejoicing in the thought that they are about to go away to the God whose ministers they are. But men, because they are sometimes afraid of death, slanderously affirm of the swans that they sing a lament at the last, not considering that no bird sings when cold or hungry or in pain, not even the nightingale, nor the swallow, nor yet the hoopoe, which are said indeed to tune a lay of sorrow, though I do not believe this to be true of them any more than of the swans. But because they are sacred to Apollo, they have the gift of prophecy, and anticipate the good things of another world, wherefore they sing and rejoice in that day more than they ever did before. And I, too, believing myself to be the consecrated servant of the same God, and the fellow-servant of the swans, and thinking that I have received from my Master gifts of prophecy which are not inferior to theirs, would not go out of life less merrily than the swans. Never mind, then, if this be your only objection, but speak and ask anything which you like, while the 11 magistrates of Athens allow." "Very good, Socrates," said Simmias. "Then I will tell you my difficulty, and Cebes will tell you his." End of Part 4. Part 5 of Phaedo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Bob Neufeld. Phaedo by Plato. Translated by Benjamin Jowett. Part 5. I feel myself, and I dare say that you have the same feeling, how hard, or rather impossible, is the attainment of any certainty about questions such as these in the present life. And yet I should deem him a coward who did not prove what is said about them to the uttermost, or whose heart failed him before he had examined them on every side. For he should persevere until he has achieved one of two things. Either he should discover, or be taught the truth about them, or, if this be impossible, I would have him take the best and most irrefragable of human theories, and let this be the raft upon which he sails through life. Not without risk, as I admit, if he cannot find some word of God which will more surely and safely carry him. And now, as you bid me, I will venture to question you. And then I shall not have to reproach myself hereafter with not having said at the time what I think. For when I consider the matter, either alone or with Cebes, the argument does certainly appear to me, Socrates, to be not sufficient. Socrates answered, I dare say, my friend, that you may be right. But I would like to know in what respect the argument is insufficient. In this respect, replied Simmias. Suppose a person, to use the same argument about harmony and the lyre, might he not say that harmony is a thing invisible, incorporeal, perfect, divine, existing in the lyre, which is harmonized, but that the lyre and the strings are matter and material, composite, earthy, and akin to mortality? And when someone breaks the lyre, or cuts and rends the strings, then he who takes this view would argue as you do, and on the same analogy, that the harmony survives and has not perished. You cannot imagine, he would say, that the lyre without the strings, and the broken strings themselves, which are mortal, remain, and yet that the harmony, which is of heavenly and immortal nature and kindred, has perished before the mortal. The harmony must still be somewhere, and the wood and strings will decay before anything can happen to that. The thought, Socrates, must have occurred to your own mind that such is our conception of the soul, and that when the body is in a manner strung and held together by the elements of hot and cold, wet and dry, then the soul is the harmony or due proportionate admixture of them. But, if so, whenever the strings of the body are unduly loosened or overstrained through disease or other injury, then the soul, though most divine, like other harmonies of music or of works of art, of course perishes at once, although the material remains of the body may last for a considerable time, until they are either decayed or burnt. And if anyone maintains that the soul, being the harmony of the elements of the body, is first to perish in that which is called death, how shall we answer him? Socrates looked fixedly at us, as his manner was, and said with a smile, Simmias has reason on his side, and why does not some one of you who is better able than myself answer him? For there is force in his attack upon me. But perhaps, before we answer him, we had better also hear what Cebes has to say, that we may gain time for reflection, and when they have both spoken, we may either assent to them, if there is truth in what they say, or if not, we will maintain our position. Please to tell me then, Cebes, he said, what was the difficulty which troubled you? Cebes said, I will tell you. My feeling is that the argument is where it was, and open to the same objections which were urged before. For I am ready to admit that the existence of the soul before entering into the bodily form has been very ingeniously, and if I may say so, quite sufficiently proven. But the existence of the soul after death is still, in my judgment, unproven. Now, my objection is not the same as that of Simmias, for I am not disposed to deny that the soul is stronger and more lasting than the body, being of opinion that in all such respects the soul very far excels the body. Well, then, says the argument to me, why do you remain unconvinced? When you see that the weaker continues in existence after the man is dead, will you not admit that the more lasting must also survive during the same period of time? Now, I will ask you to consider whether the objection, which, like Simmias, I will express in a figure, is of any weight. The analogy which I will adduce is that of an old weaver who dies, and after his death somebody says, "He is not dead, he must be alive. See, there is the coat which he himself wove and wore, and which remains whole and undecayed." And then he proceeds to ask someone who is incredulous whether a man lasts longer, or the coat which is in use and wear. And when he is answered that a man lasts far longer, thinks that he has thus certainly